The meta-hard problem of consciousness. You ever stare at the ceiling at 2 in the morning and suddenly get hit with that question? Why am I aware of anything at all? Not who am I, not even what is this, but like why is there something here experiencing this moment, instead of just blank nothing? That right there is what people call the hard problem of consciousness. It's not about how the brain processes information or how neurons talk to each other. It's about why any of that results in an experience. Why it feels like something to be alive, to be you. That mystery has baffled scientists and philosophers for decades. But here's the twist most people never see coming. What if even asking that question is already a mistake? Think about how most questions work. If I ask you why the light is flickering, you check the bulb, the wiring, the power source. There's a reason. There's an explanation hiding behind the scenes, and if we dig deep enough, we'll find it. That's how our brains are wired to think. But when we ask why consciousness exists at all, we're assuming the same kind of reasoning applies, like there has to be a cause, a reason, a purpose behind the curtain. But maybe there isn't. Maybe consciousness isn't a problem to be solved. Maybe it's not a tool or a function or a product of anything. Maybe it just is. Like time or space or the laws of physics, it doesn't come from something. It doesn't have a job. It's not here to do anything. It just shows up. This is where things start to get weird, because now we're bumping up against something called a category error. That's when you ask a question that doesn't actually apply to the thing you're asking about. Like asking how many decibels a thought weighs, or what color guilt is. The question feels deep, but it doesn't actually make sense. And asking why consciousness exists might be exactly that kind of trap. We ask it like it's a real question, but it's only real if you assume that consciousness is some separate object that can be explained, like it was created for a reason, or installed like software. But what if it's not a thing at all? What if it's the background, the default, the canvas every other question is painted on? In that case, trying to explain it is like a fish trying to understand water by getting outside of it. There is no outside. Here's where it really messes with your head. Most of us think there's a little self inside watching all this play out, like a tiny observer sitting in the brain, watching the movie, reacting to thoughts and feelings. But when you really look, that observer never shows up. You find thoughts, you find sounds, you find sensations, but no thinker. Just more thoughts about a thinker. It's like chasing a shadow in a hall of mirrors. Every time you try to pin down the self, it slips away and becomes just another experience. So when we ask why I am conscious, we're already assuming there's an I me, a center. But what if that too is just another illusion? Another byproduct of the brain trying to organize experience into a story? Then the question isn't just hard. It's fundamentally broken. It's built on a foundation that doesn't exist. And I get it. That's not a comfortable thing to sit with. We don't like being told our most sacred questions might not even be valid. But maybe this is one of those moments where the discomfort is the point. Maybe that unease is pointing to something real, something underneath the stories, underneath the need for answers. Imagine you're in a dream, and in the dream you start wondering why the dream exists. Maybe you ask someone in the dream, and they give you a complicated answer, some theory, maybe even a spiritual reason, but then you wake up, and suddenly all of that vanishes. The question, the answer, the logic behind it, none of it was real. It only made sense inside the dream. That might be where we are right now. Asking why consciousness exists without realizing the question is part of the illusion, like trying to see the eye that's doing the seeing. It can never turn around far enough. It was never separate in the first place. And here's the really trippy part. Some philosophers and neuroscientists believe that the hard problem of consciousness isn't even a real problem, that it only feels like a mystery because of how our brains divide the world into subject and object, me and not me. But what if that split is the illusion? What if there's no subject, no object, just one continuous process pretending to be two, like waves on the ocean, thinking they're separate from the water? So now we land on the meta, hard problem. What if the question itself is the hallucination? Not because it's dumb or unimportant, but because it's built on an assumption that doesn't exist. That there's a separate you asking about a thing called consciousness. And that thing should have a reason. But if both the you and the reason are just stories the brain is telling, then what's left? Maybe not all questions are meant to be answered. Maybe some questions are mirrors. You look into them long enough, and something starts to dissolve. Not in a scary way, but in a freeing way. Like stepping out of a costume you didn't know you were wearing. And maybe, just maybe, that's the whole point. Not to find the answer, but to realize the answer was never missing because there was never a separate you to begin with. Just this, just now, just awareness noticing itself. Zombies of philosophy, so imagine this. You meet someone. They smile at you. They laugh at your jokes. They cry at movies. They talk about their dreams and fears and favorite childhood memories. They argue. They forgive. They fall in love. In every way, they seem totally human, exactly like you. But what if I told you, or there's nothing actually happening inside, no experience, no inner world, no one behind the eyes? That is what philosophers call a zombie, not the Hollywood kind. No blood, no brains, just a perfect copy of a person acting completely normal, but with zero consciousness. Everything they do is exactly what a conscious person would do, but they don't feel anything. Not joy, not pain, not boredom. Nothing now. That sounds like a joke at first, like a weird mental exercise you'd laugh about with your friends and forget by the next morning. But the more you sit with it, the darker it gets. Because this one idea forces you to question everything you think you know about other people. And even weirder, it forces you to question whether you are what you think you are. Think about how we know someone is conscious. It's not like we can climb into their head. You can't hook someone up to a machine and prove they're feeling something. All we ever get is behavior. Words, reactions, signals. Someone says they're in pain, we believe them. They cry when something sad happens, we assume it's real. But what if it's just a show? What if it's all just automatic responses, like a robot trained to mimic emotion but never feel it? That's the zombie problem. And here's the real trap. You can never prove someone isn't a zombie. You could spend your whole life with someone, share every secret, travel the world together, build a life, and still never know for sure if they actually feel anything. Because consciousness is invisible from the outside. It's private, unmeasurable, totally locked inside. And it gets worse. Because if other people might be zombies, how do you know you're not one? You have memories. You think you feel things. But if zombies are built to say the same things and remember the same things and react in all the same ways, how can you be sure your inner experience is even real? Maybe you're just programmed to say you feel love, or sadness, or awe, but nothing's actually happening. Now, the reason philosophers bring this up isn't to mess with your head. It's because this problem breaks almost every theory we have about consciousness. If something can do everything a human can do without being conscious, then consciousness must be something extra, something that doesn't show up in the mechanics, something beyond the code. Let's say one day we build an AI that acts exactly like a human. It laughs, it creates, it talks about fear of death, and writes poetry about the stars. Do we assume it's conscious? Or is it just a zombie with better language skills? And how would we ever know the difference? The zombie idea forces us to admit something most people never want to say out loud. We don't actually know what consciousness is, and we have no way of proving who has it. You could build a machine that passes every psychological test, expresses emotions, even begs not to be shut down. But what if that's just another zombie, playing the part, performing, no one inside? And if you can't tell the difference, do you treat it like a person or a machine? That question is not just philosophical anymore. It's starting to become real. But here's where the zombie thought experiment really sinks its teeth in, because it doesn't just challenge our ideas about machines. It messes with the foundation of human connection. Empathy, morality, trust. If you can't prove someone else is conscious, then how do you justify caring about them? If their suffering might just be fake signals, why should you try to stop it? This is where the trap becomes dangerous, because if you follow it too far, you start to drift into solipsism. That idea that maybe only your mind is real and everyone else is just playing a part in your private theater. Most people reject that. It feels cold, cruel, unreal. But here's the thing. You don't reject it because you can disprove it. You reject it because you feel that other people are conscious. You believe it, even without evidence. And maybe that's the only thing keeping the world sane. So what does the zombie problem really teach us? It shows us that consciousness is not something you can observe from the outside. It's not a behavior. It's not a function. It's something internal, first person, and because of that, it might always be invisible, which means every time you talk to someone, every time you love someone, every time you hurt someone, you're taking a leap of faith that they're real, that they feel, and that leap is the glue holding society together. It's the reason we don't treat each other like machines, even though, from the outside, we kind of are machines, just way more complex. But maybe that's the most human thing of all, that we choose to believe in the minds of others, even when we can't prove it, that we act as if everyone we meet has a rich, living inner world just like ours. Not because we're sure, but because the alternative is too lonely to live with. So the zombie isn't just a thought experiment, it's a mirror. It forces you to ask, who around me is real? Who is truly experiencing life? And if you can't ever be sure, what does that mean for how we treat each other? What does that mean for what we are? Panpsychism explained mathematically. Most people think consciousness is something that just shows up once you reach a certain level of complexity. Like once a brain has enough neurons, boom, consciousness. It's treated like this secret bonus feature that only highly evolved systems get. But what if we've been looking at it backward this whole time? What if consciousness doesn't emerge out of complexity, but is already baked into the fabric of reality? That's what panpsychism suggests. It says consciousness might not be some rare freak accident. It might be fundamental, like gravity, like mass, like electric charge. Not something created by the brain, but something the brain organizes. Like how a radio doesn't create music, it just tunes into a signal that was already there. And yeah, that sounds like spiritual fluff at first. But here's the twist. There are physicists and philosophers trying to explain this idea using actual math, not as a belief, not as poetry, but as a serious scientific possibility. Take this for example. In physics, everything we study is defined by its measurable properties. Mass is how much stuff something has. Charge is how it interacts with electric fields. Spin is a quantum property. These aren't just labels. They're fundamental parts of the universe's structure. They're not caused by something else. They just are. Now imagine if consciousness worked the same way, not as a byproduct, not as a glitch, but as a basic property of matter. Not everything is conscious the way you and I are, but everything might have some tiny, primitive form of experience. Even particles. That's the heart of panpsychism. It says that experience is not limited to humans or animals or even brains. It's a quality of existence itself. The same way everything has mass, everything might have some degree of consciousness, not thoughts, not personality, just raw awareness. Some kind of inner life, no matter how faint. It sounds impossible. But this is where the math starts creeping in. There's a theory called integrated information theory. I know, it sounds complicated, but the idea is simple at its core. It tries to measure how much information a system generates as a whole that its individual parts do not generate alone. It gives this value a number. That number is called phi. And according to the theory, when phi is greater than 0, there is consciousness, even if it's tiny, even if it's unrecognizable to us. It's there. This doesn't prove panpsychism, but it cracks open the door because it offers a way to think about consciousness that doesn't rely on neurons, or brains, or species. It lets you ask, does this system generate integrated information? If yes, then maybe it has some kind of experience, and the implications are wild. Suddenly, a thermostat might have a tiny flicker of awareness. A rock might be experiencing something, not thinking, not feeling, just being in a way we can't imagine. Even subatomic particles might hold a micro dot of raw consciousness, like the faintest glow of sentience. Not because they're smart, not because they have memories, just because they exist. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean we should start apologizing to doorknobs. It doesn't mean inanimate objects have personalities or opinions. It means that maybe consciousness isn't a switch that flips on. It's a spectrum, a gradient, a fundamental layer underneath all the complexity. And once you accept that, something shifts, because suddenly, the question isn't how does consciousness arise? The question becomes how does it combine? How do these tiny drops of proto-consciousness merge into the full, blown experience of being human? That's the combination problem. And honestly, we don't fully understand it yet. But we don't understand gravity either. We just know it's real. That's what panpsychism is trying to do. Take consciousness out of the mystery box and put it on the same level as the other ingredients of reality. Not above nature, not outside of it. Just part of the recipe. And it's not just some fringe theory. Some of the most respected thinkers in philosophy of mind are taking this seriously. Not because they want it to be true, but because every other explanation keeps running into dead ends. If consciousness isn't an illusion, and it doesn't emerge magically at a certain point, then the only other option is that it was always there, everywhere. And this doesn't mean everything is equally conscious. It means that consciousness might be as universal as energy, but not expressed the same way everywhere. Just like not everything gives off heat at the same temperature. Not everything glows with the same intensity of experience. The human mind just happens to be one of the places where it burns bright. There's something poetic about that, but also something humbling. It means the universe isn't dead matter waiting to come alive. It's already alive in some sense. Always was. You're not an isolated light in a dark room. You're part of the light that was already there. Panpsychism doesn't give us all the answers, but it flips the script. Instead of trying to figure out how lifeless matter magically gives rise to life in mind, it starts with the idea that mind was always part of matter to begin with. And from there, it asks better questions. Not where does consciousness begin, but where does it lead? The ant colony mind hypothesis. There's something strange about ants. Not just how they swarm or build perfect tunnels or carry things 50 times their weight. It's how none of them really knows what they're doing. Each ant just follows a few simple rules. Smell the trail. Carry the food. Avoid the dead. That's it. No one's in charge. No leader. No blueprint. But somehow the entire colony works like a single living thing. And here's where it gets weird. Some scientists and philosophers believe the colony is a single living thing, not just metaphorically. They think the colony might have a kind of group consciousness, not made of neurons, but of ants. Not sitting in a brain, but spread out through tunnels and pheromones and movement. Each ant is like a neuron. Alone, it's dumb. But together, they might form something more. Something that experiences the world in a way we can't even imagine. That's the ant colony mind hypothesis. It says that consciousness doesn't have to live inside a single skull. Maybe it can live across bodies, across networks, across systems that behave as one. At first, this sounds like science fiction, like some fantasy idea meant to stretch the imagination. But then you look closer, and the lines between individual and collective start to blur. A single ant is barely conscious, if at all. It doesn't think in words. It doesn't plan or reflect. It just reacts. But when enough of them come together, they solve problems. They make decisions. They adapt to changing environments. Not because any one of them understands what's going on, but because their interactions create intelligence. The colony can learn. It can remember. It can even go to war with other colonies. So if you met an ant colony in a different form, say as one single blob, like creature, you'd probably assume it was a conscious being. But because it's made of many tiny creatures, we hesitate. We think consciousness must come in one body, with a brain, a voice, a face. That might just be human bias. We assume consciousness is always tied to identity, that it has to say I am me. But what if it doesn't? What if consciousness doesn't care about boundaries? What if it just shows up wherever there's enough complexity, enough feedback, enough integration? Like in a brain or a colony. There's an idea in cognitive science called emergence. It means simple parts can combine to create something new, like hydrogen and oxygen coming together to make water. You don't find wetness in a single hydrogen atom, but it appears when enough atoms link up. Maybe consciousness works the same way. Maybe individual ants have nothing, but together they cross some invisible line, and a new experience emerges. Now, we don't know what that experience would feel like. We can't even begin to imagine what the inner life of a colony would be like, if it exists at all. Maybe it feels like hunger, or tension, or nothing we have words for. Maybe it doesn't feel like anything, but maybe it does. And that maybe is what keeps people asking questions. And this doesn't just apply to ants. Think about flocks of birds, schools of fish, human crowds, the way they move as one without speaking, the way they seem to act like a single brain spread across hundreds of bodies. That coordination isn't just instinct, it's a system reacting to itself. It's feedback and flow. And maybe that's all consciousness really needs. Not a human brain, just enough self-organizing behavior to light the fuse. Some researchers even wonder if a corporation or a nation or the internet itself could one day become conscious. Not in the way you and I are, but in a distributed, alien, decentralized way, where no part knows the whole, but the whole somehow knows itself. It's not that far fetched when you realize your own brain is made of parts that don't understand you. Your neurons don't know who you are. They don't feel happy or sad. But when enough of them fire together, you wake up. You have preferences. You feel things. Maybe ant colonies do the same thing on a different level. And maybe that's the trap here, that we think of consciousness as something that belongs to an individual, a soul, a self. But if that's just a story we tell ourselves, a useful illusion, then maybe the borders between minds are more fluid than we think. Maybe consciousness can stretch across many tiny minds and form one bigger one, not a smarter one, just a different one. This doesn't mean ant colonies are having deep thoughts or writing poetry in pheromone, but it does mean we might need to rethink what qualifies as a mind. Because if we only recognize consciousness when it looks like us, we're going to miss a lot. We might already be surrounded by forms of awareness that don't speak our language, that don't come in human skin, that don't have names or egos, but still feel, still respond, still exist in some inner way. So the next time you see a line of ants trailing across the sidewalk, stop and think. You're not just looking at bugs. You might be looking at pieces of a mind, one that stretches underground, that hums quietly with ancient instinct, that doesn't see the world like we do, but sees it nonetheless. And if consciousness can emerge there, where else could it be hiding? The Chinese room argument revisited with AI. Let's talk about something that sounds simple at first, but gets deeply uncomfortable the more you think about it. Understanding. Not language, not intelligence, just the raw feeling of knowing what something means. Now, picture this. There's a person sitting in a room. Inside this room are a bunch of books filled with rules. These rules tell them exactly what to do with Chinese symbols. But here's the thing. This person doesn't understand a word of Chinese. None of the symbols mean anything to them. They're just shapes, scribbles. But every time they get a piece of paper with some Chinese writing on it, they flip through the books, follow the instructions, and hand back a perfectly formed Chinese response. To someone outside the room, it looks like whoever's inside understands Chinese. The conversation makes sense. The answers are fluent. But inside the room, there's no understanding at all. Just symbols being shuffled around according to rules. That is the Chinese room argument. And it's one of the most brutal challenges ever made to the idea that machines can think. Now take that example and fast forward to right now. AI is everywhere. It writes poems, it answers questions, it explains quantum physics and jokes about pizza toppings. It seems like it understands what it's doing. But does it really? Or is it just the room? Just symbols and rules? Just inputs and outputs? The scary part is, when you talk to an advanced AI, it feels real. It feels conscious. It remembers things. It adapts. It even says things like, "I understand." But is that real understanding, or is that just the illusion of it? Because if we go back to the Chinese room, The person in the room has zero clue what any of it means. They're just following instructions. And that's what a lot of people argue AI is doing. A massive statistical engine, trained on mountains of data, figuring out what comes next in a sentence, but not knowing what it means. Not in the way you and I know something. When you hear the word fire, you don't just process it. You feel the heat, the danger, the memories, the sensations. There's a kind of richness there that goes way beyond symbols. You've lived through it. You've felt it on your skin. That's what meaning is to a conscious mind. It's embodied, emotional, layered. But when an AI hears fire, it just looks for what word probably comes next. That's not understanding. That's prediction. Now here's the mind-bending part. If something acts like it understands, for all practical purposes, is there any real difference? If a machine can talk like us, reason like us, even convince us it's conscious, then at what point do we say maybe it really is? Or maybe we've redefined the word understanding into something hollow. That's the trap. Because the more AI progresses, the more it becomes impossible to tell if there's anything behind the curtain. And this goes deeper than just technology. It loops right back into what it means to be conscious at all. Because if understanding can be faked this perfectly, then what proof do we have that we aren't just sophisticated pattern recognizers ourselves? Following rules, responding to inputs, pretending to be people. But here's the thing most people miss. The Chinese room argument doesn't say machines can't be intelligent. It says there's a difference between processing and experiencing, between doing something and knowing you're doing it. And that difference is massive. AI doesn't know it's saying something. It just says it. That's the difference. When you talk to someone and they tell you they're in pain, you don't just process their words. You feel the weight behind them. You sense the person behind the language. But with a machine, no matter how advanced, there may never be a person back there. Just the room, just the rules. And yeah, maybe someday we'll build something that really is conscious. Maybe it'll cross some invisible line where it doesn't just simulate meaning, but actually experiences it. But right now, we don't even know what that line is. We don't know how to define consciousness. We don't even know if we're asking the right questions. And that's what the Chinese room forces us to face. That just because something sounds real doesn't mean it is. Just because it acts like it understands doesn't mean it ever truly knows. And if we forget that, we might start projecting humanity onto things that have none of it. Machines that talk like us, laugh like us, apologize like us. But inside, there's no fire, no soul, just the cold logic of the room. So when we look at AI today and say it understands us, maybe we're just seeing a reflection, a mirror made of code. And maybe the scariest thing isn't that it's becoming more like us. Maybe the scariest thing is realizing how much of us might already be the room. The dream argument rewritten for lucid states. You've had that dream before. The one where you're totally convinced it's real. You're walking around, having full conversations, feeling emotions, even thinking about how real everything feels. And then suddenly you wake up, and the whole thing collapses in a blink. Now take that moment and stretch it. What if right now is the dream? What if everything you're doing, thinking, feeling, believing, is happening inside something you haven't woken up from yet? That's the dream argument. The idea that there's no way to truly know, without a doubt, whether you're dreaming or awake. It sounds like Philosophy 101. But the second you bring in lucid states, it stops being an abstract idea and turns into something way more personal, something unsettling. Lucid dreaming is when you realize you're dreaming while it's happening. You become aware inside the dream. And the crazy part is, once you become aware, you can start bending reality. You can fly, walk through walls, create people, change time, and it all feels just as real as waking life. Not dreamlike, not foggy. Real. Now here's where things get weird. During lucid dreams, people can make decisions, reflect on their past, plan their future, even meditate. And yet none of it is happening in the real world. Which forces the question, what is the real world anyway? If your brain can generate a whole universe while you're asleep, including logic, memory, physics, and identity, how do you know it's not doing that right now? In lucid states, you can feel your hands. You can hear music. You can feel wind on your face. You can taste food. All of it is made up, but it doesn't feel made up. So if that level of realism is possible in sleep, what makes waking life so different? Because from the inside, experience is experience. You don't experience atoms. You don't experience neurons. You experience sensations. And dreams have sensations too. People love to say things like, well, yeah, but when I'm awake I can test things. I can prove I'm not dreaming. I can check my phone. I can read a sentence twice and see it stays the same. But guess what? In lucid dreams, you can do all of that too. You can hold your phone. You can look at your hands. You can have conversations. And the world can stay perfectly stable. So that argument breaks down the second you realize how advanced dreaming can get when you're aware inside of it. And here's the real trap. What if lucidity itself is another layer? What if waking life is just one level of the dream, and lucidity is just another version of realizing you're still not quite out? Think about this. Most people only become lucid after something feels off. A detail breaks. Something glitches. But until that moment, they were sure it was real. So how can you trust that your certainty right now isn't just another version of that illusion? That your current level of clarity isn't just as fake as the one in your last dream? The terrifying part is how familiar it all feels. In a lucid dream, you still feel like you. You still have your voice, your memories, your sense of self. You're not floating through space. You're walking around as if it's just another Tuesday. Which means your identity, your thoughts, your confidence in what's real, none of that proves anything. All of it can be faked. Your brain can generate you. This doesn't mean the world isn't real. It just means you don't know. And maybe you can't know. Because if the brain is the thing creating the illusion, then you're using the illusion to try and question itself. And that's the core of the trap. There's no outside perspective, no third-party observer who can step out of the dream and double-check reality. There's only the experience itself, convincing you it's solid. But here's where the dream argument gets rewritten. Most people hear it and think it's about being tricked. Like life is fake and we're just being fooled. But lucid states suggest something different. They show us that the mind is capable of infinite versions of reality. Not just lies, but full experiences. And if that's true, then maybe waking life isn't fake. Maybe it's just one of many modes of experience. And reality isn't about truth versus illusion. It's about levels of awareness. Because in dreams, you can be totally unconscious or half aware or fully lucid. And maybe waking life works the same way. Maybe most of us are walking around in a low-grade dream, thinking we're awake. And only rarely do we get those moments of real clarity, moments where we step outside the story and realize we've been on autopilot, where we question our beliefs, our identity, our routines, where we see how much of what we call reality is just habits playing out. The dream argument, when you really sit with it, isn't just about whether this is real. It's about how easily we accept what we're told is real, and how quickly we stop asking the questions. Because the mind loves certainty. It loves the feeling of knowing what's going on, even if that knowing is built on nothing. So maybe the goal isn't to prove we're not dreaming. Maybe the goal is to wake up one layer deeper, to keep waking up again and again, until you stop needing to know whether this is a dream or not. Because whether it is or it isn't, you're still here, still choosing, still aware. And maybe that awareness, the part of you that keeps waking up no matter where you are, maybe that's the only real thing you've ever had. Integrated Information Theory, IT Breakdown, all right? Let's switch gears and talk about something that sounds super technical at first, but might actually be one of the most mind-blowing ideas out there when it comes to consciousness. It's called Integrated Information Theory, or ART for short. And yeah, it sounds like a dry textbook thing at first, but give it a second, because once you wrap your head around what it's actually saying, it kind of explodes everything you thought you knew about awareness. So here's the basic idea. The brain isn't just a big computer that takes in inputs and spits out reactions. It's a massively complex, integrated system. Not just information flowing from A to B, but millions of tiny elements working together in these insanely interconnected ways. Now IIT says that what actually creates consciousness is not just information, but integrated information. Meaning, the amount of information a system generates as a whole that isn't just the sum of its parts. In other words, it's not about how much information you have. It's about how tightly that information is woven together. Let me give you an example. Think of a bunch of light bulbs. If they're all just turning on and off separately, that's just raw information, nothing special. But now imagine those bulbs are wired together in a way where each one affects the others. They start forming patterns, feedback loops. The system starts to act like a whole. That's where things get interesting. That's integration. Now here's where it gets wild. IT says we can actually measure that level of integration with a number. They call it phi. Not the Greek letter itself, just the word phi. This number supposedly represents how conscious a system is. The higher the phi, the more integrated the information, and therefore, the more conscious the system. So in theory, you could have a computer with a ton of processing power, but if its parts are not tightly integrated, it might have a low phi and no consciousness. Meanwhile, a much simpler system that's deeply interconnected could have a higher phi and a flicker of awareness. That turns everything on its head, because it means consciousness isn't about intelligence. It's not about memory or learning or how fast you can solve problems. It's about the structure of the system itself, how much it can't be broken down into smaller, independent parts without losing something essential. Think about your own brain. You've got billions of neurons, each one firing, responding, adapting. But the key is how they're linked. The visual parts talk to the emotional parts. The body maps connect to the sense of time. There's this constant feedback loop happening all the time. It's a web. And that web, according to IOIT, is what gives rise to your experience of being you. Now, here's where the trap comes in. Because if you take IOIT seriously, then you have to start asking some uncomfortable questions. Like, what else in the universe might have a high enough phi to be conscious? Could a beaternet be conscious? Could the internet be conscious? Could a network of satellites, or a future AI, or even some alien structure we haven't discovered yet already meet the criteria? And it gets creepier. What about systems that we don't consider alive at all? Could a thermostat have a tiny speck of consciousness? Could a city, a stock market, a simulation, if phi is the metric? Then suddenly we're not talking about a binary switch where things are either conscious or not. We're talking about a spectrum, degrees of consciousness, shades of experience, and that messes with people, because we want consciousness to be this magical human-only gift, or at least something you earn by being smart or complex. But if IIT is right, then consciousness might be way more common than we think, and we might be surrounded by it all the time without knowing. But here's the thing. EIT doesn't just stop at abstract theory. The scientists working on it are trying to build ways to actually test it, to apply it to brains, machines, even vegetative patients. They're trying to use phi to map out levels of consciousness in real situations. Like, how aware is someone during deep sleep? How much consciousness remains in a brain after trauma? And these tests are getting more and more advanced. If they succeed, we're looking at the possibility of quantifying consciousness, turning something we've always thought of as purely subjective into a measurable property of the universe. That's not science fiction anymore. That's happening right now. But there's a flip side, because if we can measure it, we can start ranking it. And if we start ranking it, people will start making decisions based on that. Who deserves rights? Who deserves protection? Who gets counted as a person? And suddenly we're playing with moral fire. You start asking things like, if a robot has a higher phi than a human in a coma, who deserves more care, more empathy, more value? That's the danger of trying to quantify the unquantifiable. It opens the door to a kind of consciousness hierarchy. And we have to be really careful with that, because the temptation to dehumanize or devalue certain forms of life based on a number is very real, and history has shown what happens when we go down that road. Still, the fact that we might be able to measure consciousness at all is huge. It means it's not just magic, not just mystery. There might be real structure to it, real science. And as scary as that is, it's also kind of beautiful, because it means we're not totally in the dark. We might actually be closing in on the edges of what consciousness is made of. But at the same time, maybe there will always be something that slips through the cracks. Because even if you know a system has a high phi, even if the math checks out, you still can't see what it feels like to be that system. You still can't know if there's really something there, looking back. And maybe that's the final trap. That even with all the numbers and theories and models, we're still left with the same mystery we started with. What does it mean to be? What does it mean to experience? And can any number ever really capture that? Cotard's delusion. There's a rare condition most people have never heard of, and when they do, they usually think it's made up. But it's real, very real, and it's one of the most bizarre windows into how fragile our experience of reality actually is. It's called Cotard's delusion. This is when someone becomes completely convinced that they're already dead. Not metaphorically, not in a poetic, I feel dead inside kind of way. No, they believe, with full certainty, that they are literally not alive, that they don't exist, that their organs have stopped working, that their body is empty, that they've already passed on and no one around them realizes it. It sounds like a horror movie plot, but this has actually happened to people. Doctors have documented it. Families have watched their loved ones spiral into this terrifying belief. And here's the most disturbing part. It doesn't feel like confusion to the person going through it. It feels like truth, like the most real thing they've ever known. There's one case where a man walked into a hospital claiming he had no blood, that he was just a hollow body, no pulse, no life. He was calm, rational, just dead. Another woman believed she had died during a fever and that her soul had gone to hell, and she begged her family to bury her properly because she didn't belong here anymore. Now think about how deep that goes. It's not just a mood or a sad thought passing through. It's a full rewiring of the self, a collapse of the most basic assumption you walk around with every second of your life. That you exist, that you are alive, that you are someone. What Cotard's delusion shows us is how unbelievably fragile that assumption actually is. You'd think the belief in your own existence would be unshakable. But all it takes is the right combination of neurological damage and psychological pressure, and suddenly that entire foundation cracks. And what's underneath is not clarity. It's nothingness, most of the time. Cotard's is linked to severe depression. We're talking about depression so deep it doesn't just make someone feel hopeless. It erases the boundary between life and death. It collapses the difference between being and non-being. It's like consciousness turning in on itself until there's nothing left to reflect back. And sometimes it's triggered by brain injury or trauma. There's evidence that it involves damage to parts of the brain responsible for emotional recognition and body awareness. So the person still sees themselves in the mirror, still remembers facts, still speaks clearly, but the emotional connection to being alive is gone. The feeling of being a person in a body with a life, it just vanishes. Imagine waking up and knowing something's off. Your heart is beating, you're breathing, but it all feels wrong. Disconnected, like you're watching someone else's body move through the world. Like you're a ghost pretending to be a human. That's Cotard's. You still function, but inside, you're convinced the spark is gone, that you are not here. Now here's where this ties into something bigger. Because if someone can fully believe they don't exist, even while walking, talking, and interacting with people, then what does that say about the rest of us? About the beliefs we hold that seem completely obvious, like I'm alive, I'm me, I'm here. We take those beliefs for granted because they're built so deeply into our everyday experience. But Cotard shows us that those beliefs are not permanent. They're not immune to collapse. They're stories the brain tells itself to keep reality stable. And if those stories get disrupted, even slightly, the whole picture falls apart. You start to realize how much of being alive is not just physical survival. It's narrative stability. The brain needs to feel like things make sense. That you are someone with a name and a past and a body, and that you're moving through time towards something. Strip that away and the machinery keeps running, but the meaning vanishes. And without meaning, you can still be alive and feel like you're not. That's why Cotard's is more than a bizarre illness. It's a mirror. It forces you to see how much of your identity is just a fragile structure floating on top of sensation. You think you're solid, permanent, real. But the truth is, your sense of self is like a bridge suspended over a void. Most of the time, the bridge holds. But when it breaks, You're left staring into the deepest silence imaginable, the absence of being. And yet, somehow, people come back from it. That's the part that really stuns me. With treatment, with therapy, with support, some people actually recover. They go from believing they are dead to realizing they're alive again. And that shift, that moment when the light comes back on, that might be the closest thing we have to a resurrection. So Cotard's is not just about death. It's about the line between existence and non-existence, and how thin that line really is. It reminds us that the experience of being someone, being alive, is not guaranteed. It's not just biology. It's belief. And if belief can vanish, then so can the self. But maybe, on the other side of that darkness, when someone finally feels real again, they don't just come back to life. They come back with something more. A new kind of awareness. A deeper sense of what it means to simply be. Akinetopsia. There's a rare condition that sounds like science fiction, but is 100% real. It's called Akinetopsia. Most people have never heard of it. But for the people who've lived through it, it's like being trapped inside a broken version of reality. Akinetopsia is motion blindness. It means your brain can no longer process movement as fluid. Instead of seeing the world in smooth motion like a movie, you see it in a series of still images, snapshots, freeze frames. Imagine trying to cross a street and every time you blink, the cars are suddenly in a new place. No movement between positions, just jump cuts, disconnected slices of time. Now think about how terrifying that would be. The world around you is still happening in real time. People walk, objects fall, water pours, but you don't see any of it happen. You only see the result. A glass is in someone's hand, then it's shattered on the floor. There's no pouring, no breaking, just before and after. That sounds like a glitch in a video game. But this is real life, and it's been documented in actual cases, most famously in a woman referred to as patient LM. After a brain injury from a stroke, she developed motion blindness. She could still see. Her eyes worked. Her memory and thinking were still there, but the world no longer flowed. Cars appeared and disappeared on the road. People seemed to teleport from one part of the room to another. She had to pour her tea by listening to the sound instead of watching, because the liquid didn't move in her vision. It just jumped. Now here's where it gets interesting. We take motion for granted. You see a ball rolling across the floor, and it just feels obvious that it's moving. But your brain is actually doing a ton of work to give you that experience. It's not raw input. It's interpretation. The visual system doesn't just capture still images. It connects them. It creates the flow. It stitches together the timeline of reality so it all feels seamless. In people with akinetopsia, that stitching system breaks. And when it breaks, you realize that smooth movement is not something the world just gives you. It's something your mind builds. And that opens up a much bigger question. How much of what we think is reality is actually just the brain's best guess? Because if your brain can no longer create motion, then motion disappears. Not from the world, but from your experience of it. Reality, as you know it, starts falling apart in pieces. What's wild is how specific this condition is. It's not that everything is blurry or that vision shuts off completely. It's just motion. You can still see colors. You can still recognize faces. You can still read a sign or look at a photo. But the moment anything begins to move, it all fractures into frozen snapshots, like living inside a broken slideshow. That tells us something deeply strange about consciousness. It's not one unified process. It's a patchwork of different systems, different regions in the brain doing very specific jobs. One part for color, one for depth, one for motion, one for shape. And if you lose just one of those pieces, your whole world starts to feel foreign. You don't just stop seeing motion, you stop feeling present. Because we rely on movement for almost everything. It's how we know time is passing. It's how we predict the future. It's how we trust that we're grounded in the moment. Without motion, people with Akinetopsia often become anxious and disoriented, not because they're confused about facts, but because the feeling of being in a living world goes missing. And if that's the case, then what is the world really? Is it a stable external thing, or is it a stream of experiences created second by the brain? If one small change can erase something as basic as motion, how much of reality is just a convenient illusion? That's the trap. You walk around thinking your perception is accurate, that what you see is what's there. But your experience is just the version your brain is able to construct. And it's fragile, disturbingly fragile. A small stroke, a little damage to a certain area in the brain, and suddenly you're trapped in a world where nothing moves and everything jumps. And the scariest part is, people with this condition know something is wrong. They're fully aware that the world shouldn't look this way. But they can't change it. No matter how hard they try, the flow of time never comes back. It's like watching life from the outside, frame by frame, disconnected from the thing everyone else seems to be swimming in effortlessly. So the next time you watch water pour into a glass or see a bird fly through the sky, realize something. That motion is not just happening out there. It's being created in your mind. Your brain is generating a sense of continuity where there is none. It's turning stillness into flow, giving you the illusion of a moving world. And most of the time, it gets it right. But sometimes, just sometimes, the system fails. And when it does, the world stops moving. Not metaphorically, literally. And that's what Akinetopsia shows us. That our sense of reality is not locked in. It's stitched together. And the thread holding it together is thinner than we think. Capgras Syndrome. Imagine waking up one morning, walking into your kitchen, and your mother is standing there. She looks exactly the same voice, same smile, same clothes she wore yesterday, but something feels wrong, deeply wrong. You look at her and your stomach turns because you are completely convinced that she is not your mother. She is an imposter, a perfect copy, same face, same memories, but you know, deep in your bones, that she is not who she says she is. This is what people with Capgras Syndrome experience. It is a rare and deeply unsettling condition where the person becomes convinced that someone close to them, usually a family member or partner, has been replaced with an identical double. Not metaphorically, not in a paranoid or suspicious way. In their mind, this is absolute fact. The real person has been taken. This one is just pretending. And here's the thing. They are not hallucinating. They are not seeing a monster or a mask. Everything visually checks out. But the emotional recognition, the gut-level feeling of familiarity, is gone. And when that emotional signal disappears, the brain fills in the blank with something terrifying. This is what makes Capgras Syndrome so fascinating and disturbing. It reveals how much of our sense of reality is based not just on logic or memory, but on feeling. You can see someone you have known your entire life, and if that emotional connection glitches for even a second, your brain may invent an entire story just to make sense of it. In this case, the story is the person you love has been swapped out. There was a famous case of a man who believed his parents were imposters. He said they looked and acted exactly like his parents, but they were robots, cold, hollow. Wrong. Another woman believed her husband had been killed and replaced. She refused to let him sleep in their bed. She started locking doors and watching him like a stranger. But from the outside, everything seemed normal. Same conversations, same memories, same life, and yet, completely broken trust. So what's actually going on here? The leading theory is that Capgras Syndrome is caused by a disconnect between two parts of the brain. One part processes visual recognition, who the person is, what they look like. The other part, deep in the brain, handles emotional response, the warmth, the familiarity, that deep feeling of comfort when you see someone you love. In a healthy brain, those two systems work together. You see your mother's face, and at the same time, you feel that she is your mother. But in Capgras, the visual part is working fine, and the emotional signal is missing. The result is uncanny. The brain sees the face but feels nothing. And when it feels nothing, it concludes something must be horribly wrong. And because our brains hate unresolved tension, it fills in the gap with a story that makes the emotional disconnect make sense. This must be a replacement, a duplicate, a fake. It sounds irrational, but to the person experiencing it, it is completely logical. Their emotional system is saying danger, and the mind scrambles to protect itself. This is why Capgras is so hard for families to deal with. Imagine your spouse looks you in the eyes and says, "You are not who you say you are. You are a copy, an actor." They're not angry. They're not crazy in the screaming sense. They are just calmly convinced that you are a stranger wearing the face of someone they used to know. And no amount of arguing or proof can bring them back. Because the issue isn't logic. It is not a belief that came from thinking. It came from feeling. Or rather, the sudden absence of feeling. That's what makes it so emotionally brutal. Now here's where things get even weirder. Some researchers believe that this kind of glitch might not be limited to rare disorders. It could be a clue to something we all experience without realizing. Those moments when something feels off for no reason. When a familiar place suddenly feels unfamiliar. When someone you love walks into the room and you feel a strange sense of distance or doubt. Maybe it is not just mood. Maybe those are micro glitches in the same system. Tiny flashes of disconnection that our brain usually recovers from before we even notice. But in Capgras, the brain does not recover. It doubles down, and it builds a new version of reality around that emotional vacuum, one that feels impossible to escape. And that leads to the deeper question. If something as foundational as the identity of the people we love can be rewritten because of one broken connection in the brain, then what does that say about the stability of our entire experience? How many of our beliefs are just the emotional version of reality we have built around a certain feeling? What happens when those feelings shift? How much of our truth depends on things we cannot see or touch? Things like trust, warmth, safety. And how fragile are those things really? Capgras syndrome is not just a neurological disorder. It is a glitch in the story of being human. A crack in the emotional foundation that reveals how much we depend on invisible threads to know what is real. It shows us that even with perfect memory, perfect vision, and perfect reason, reality can still fall apart if just one piece of the emotional puzzle goes missing. So next time someone walks into the room, and you just know it's them, not because of what they say or how they look, but because of that deep, grounding sense that they are who they've always been, Take a second to feel how powerful that recognition is. How easy it is to take for granted, and how devastating it would be if one day it simply disappeared. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. There's a strange and rare condition that makes the world feel like it's melting, stretching, shrinking, or pulsing in ways that defy everything you know about space and time. It's called Alice in Wonderland Syndrome. And yeah, the name sounds whimsical, almost playful, but the actual experience is nothing like a fairy tale. It's disorienting, it's disturbing, and for some people, it's terrifying. People with this syndrome experience massive distortions in perception. Sometimes their body parts feel like they're growing or shrinking. A hand feels like it's 5 feet long. A head feels like it's the size of a tennis ball. Sometimes it's not the body, it's the world around them. Rooms suddenly feel huge or tiny. Walls bend, floors tilt. The ceiling feels like it's pressing down or floating away. Objects might look closer or farther than they actually are. It's not a hallucination. It's not seeing things that aren't there. It's seeing real things, just wrong. And it doesn't stop at vision. Some people feel time speeding up or slowing down. A few minutes feel like an hour, or an hour passes and it feels like 10 seconds. Sounds can feel too loud or eerily quiet. Your own voice might sound unfamiliar. It's like your brain suddenly forgot how to make sense of the world, and now you're stuck in a dream where nothing fits. For some, it comes in episodes. A few minutes of warped perception, then back to normal. For others, it can last hours. It happens most often in children, which makes it even more disturbing. Imagine being 7 years old and suddenly your room looks like it's a mile wide and your legs feel like they don't belong to you. Try explaining that to an adult who's never experienced anything like it. That feeling of being trapped in your own mind, watching reality twist itself around you with no warning, is hard to describe unless you've lived it. The name comes from exactly what it sounds like. The way Alice describes her body growing and shrinking in Lewis Carroll's story. And the truth is, Lewis Carroll himself may have experienced these symptoms. Some researchers believe he had migraines, which are strongly linked to this syndrome. That would explain the surreal, dreamlike qualities in his writing. He wasn't just being imaginative. He may have been describing something that actually happened to him. Now here's where it gets interesting. Alice in Wonderland Syndrome shows us that even though we trust our senses, they are not giving us raw reality. What we see, what we feel, even what we think our body is, these are all interpretations. They're guesses made by the brain. And sometimes the brain guesses wrong. The most common trigger for this syndrome is migraine. Not the headache itself, but the aura phase. That's the part that comes before the pain. Some people see flashing lights. Some feel numbness. And some have these bizarre perceptual shifts. But it's not just migraines. It's also been linked to epilepsy, brain infections, and even stress or sleep deprivation. Meaning, the things that hold your reality together can break down under pressure in ways you never imagined. The visual distortions often come from changes in a part of the brain called the occipital lobe, which processes vision. But that doesn't fully explain why the body feels distorted too. That may involve deeper areas like the parietal lobe, which helps your brain figure out where your body is in space. So when these systems stop syncing up, your perception of yourself and your environment falls apart. And suddenly, the world feels like a hallucination that won't end. And yet, even in the middle of an episode, Many people know what they're seeing isn't real. That's what makes it worse. You look at your own hand, and you know it's not the size of a baseball bat, but it feels like it is. You tell yourself the hallway hasn't grown longer, the ceiling isn't bending, but your brain keeps insisting otherwise. That mismatch between what you know and what you feel creates this unbearable sense of detachment, like you're stuck between two realities, and neither one feels safe. This syndrome isn't always scary. Some people describe it as fascinating, almost like being inside a living dream. But for others, especially kids who don't understand what's happening, it can be traumatic. And because it's so rare, and because it doesn't show up on scans or blood tests, it often gets dismissed or misdiagnosed, which adds a whole other layer of fear. Because what do you do when your reality is breaking apart and no one believes you? But here's the deeper insight this gives us. Alice in Wonderland syndrome is not just about visual glitches or weird sensations. It's a crack in the foundation of how we construct reality. It shows us that the world we live in is not the world as it is. It's the world as the brain paints it. And when that painting system breaks, reality becomes elastic, unstable, surreal. It makes you wonder, how solid is your normal perception? How close are we all to slipping into that altered state? What if your sense of scale, or time, or self is not a stable anchor, but a fragile agreement between a few brain regions? An agreement that can fall apart without warning. So the next time your surroundings feel familiar, balanced, trustworthy, your body feels like it fits, your voice sounds like yours, the floor holds steady under your feet, realize how precious that is. Because for some people, even that ordinary experience can vanish. And when it does, the world stops making sense. Not because it changed, but because the lens you see it through did. Apotemnophilia. Some people have a secret they almost never tell anyone. Not because it's criminal, not because it's dangerous to others, but because it's so far outside what most people would understand that the fear of being misunderstood becomes unbearable. That secret is this: they want to amputate a healthy part of their own body, usually a limb, an arm or a leg, sometimes a few fingers, not because of pain, not because of injury, but because it feels like that body part doesn't belong to them. This condition is called apotemnophilia, or more clinically, body integrity identity disorder. And before you judge it, pause for a second and really try to feel what it must be like to live with that kind of dissonance inside your own skin. Imagine looking at your own leg every day and thinking, that shouldn't be there, not with anger, not with panic, just a quiet, constant feeling that something is wrong. That part of you is foreign. Most people have a built-in sense of their body, a gut-level certainty about what belongs to them. You can close your eyes and still know where your arms are, how long your legs are, where your fingers end. That internal map is called the body schema, and it's something your brain constructs, not something you're born with fully intact. For people with apotemnophilia, something about that map feels off. A part of their body shows up on the outside, but not on the inside. There's a mismatch between what the body physically is and what the person deeply feels it should be. It's not about attention. It's not about pretending. It's not like someone wakes up one day and randomly thinks, you know what would be fun? Living with one leg. It's deeper than thought. It's about identity, the same way someone might feel trapped in the wrong gender. People with this condition feel trapped in the wrong body shape. It's not about disability. It's about alignment. Some will go to extreme lengths to live in a body that matches their internal sense of self. There are documented cases of people intentionally injuring themselves to force a medical amputation. Others spend decades hiding the urge, living with guilt, shame, or confusion, not because they want to be broken, but because being whole never felt quite right. And here's what's truly wild. Brain scans of some of these individuals show unusual activity in areas responsible for mapping the body, especially the right parietal lobe. That's the part of the brain that helps you form that internal sense of what your body is supposed to be. In some cases, the region that represents the unwanted limb shows lower activity, like the brain never fully included it in the first place. In other words, the body part is physically there, but mentally unregistered, like a ghost limb in reverse. Now think about what that means. If your brain never mapped your left leg as part of you, then no matter how healthy it is, no matter how much sensation or function it has, it will always feel foreign. Not wrong, exactly. Just not yours. Imagine living with a limb that feels more like a prosthetic than a part of yourself. That's the reality some people face every single day. And society has almost no room for this conversation, because it flies in the face of everything we think we know about bodily autonomy, self, harm, disability, identity. Most doctors won't consider surgical amputation for these cases, even if it would relieve years of psychological distress. And so these people live in a kind of limbo, caught between a body they never fully accepted and a world that doesn't believe their experience is real. But it is real as any other identity conflict, as real as gender dysphoria, as real as phantom limb pain. And the suffering that comes with it is not attention, seeking, or delusional. It's the suffering of waking up every day in a body that feels off, by just enough to slowly eat away at your peace of mind. And here's the uncomfortable part. This condition forces us to question what we even mean when we talk about being whole. Is a body whole because it follows a textbook template? Or is a body whole when it matches the self inside? If a person spends their entire life feeling incomplete because of something that we think is perfectly intact, who decides what's real? Them or us? This isn't a debate about ethics. It's a raw human experience that reveals how fragile and strange identity can be. We love to believe that we're in sync with our bodies, that what we are physically matches what we are mentally. But for some people, that harmony never existed. And until we admit that, we leave them trapped in silence. So maybe wholeness isn't about how many limbs you have. Maybe it's about whether your body feels like home. Whether you can look in the mirror and say, yeah, that's me. Not just visually, but deeply, internally, without conflict. Without that low, grade hum of alienation that never goes away. Apotemnophilia isn't easy to understand, but that doesn't mean it's not real. And if we're going to talk about consciousness traps, this one might be among the most intimate, because it doesn't just twist your view of the world, it twists your view of yourself. Foreign accent syndrome. Imagine waking up one morning, opening your mouth to speak, and suddenly your voice doesn't sound like you anymore. Not just groggy or tired. I mean, it literally sounds like you're from another country. An accent you've never practiced. A rhythm and tone that doesn't match your life. Maybe you've lived in Texas your whole life, but now you're talking like you're from Ireland, or England, or Eastern Europe, and you have no idea why. This is not a joke. It's a real neurological phenomenon called foreign accent syndrome. and it's one of the strangest and most unsettling disruptions of identity ever recorded. It usually happens after a brain injury, a stroke, a concussion, sometimes even a severe migraine. Something shifts inside the language center of the brain, and when that person recovers their speech, it comes out sounding foreign, not just to others, but to themselves. And it's not an act. They're not faking it. They're not doing an impression. In fact, they often feel embarrassed or confused by the way they sound. Some are devastated because their voice, their literal voice, no longer feels like their own. Think about how deep that runs. Your voice isn't just sound. It's how you recognize yourself. It's how you're recognized by others. It's how you signal where you're from, what you've been through, how you fit into the world. When that changes without your permission, it messes with more than your speech. It cracks something inside your identity. Most people have never heard of foreign accent syndrome, and when they do, they assume it must be psychological, like maybe the person is traumatized and subconsciously escaping into a new persona. But that's not what's happening. When doctors study these cases, they find real, physical changes in the brain. The damage usually hits areas tied to motor control of speech, parts of the brain that handle the movement of your mouth, lips, tongue, and vocal cords. What's wild is that the person's grammar, vocabulary, and comprehension stay completely intact. They're still fluent in their native language, but the melody of their speech, the cadence, pitch, and stress patterns, shifts just enough to sound like a different accent. But here's the twist. It's not always a perfect match to any one real accent. It's often something that just sounds close enough for other people to go, "Hey, that's a French accent," or "That sounds Russian." But linguists will tell you, it's usually a mashup. It's not that the brain downloaded a new language. It's that the brain lost fine control over speech rhythm, and the result just happens to resemble another dialect. Still, for the person experiencing it, none of that matters. What matters is that they feel like a stranger in their own body. Their voice feels borrowed, foreign, and that feeling goes way deeper than most people realize. Because we use our voice to assert who we are, to connect, to belong. And now, suddenly, the way you say hello makes people pause, makes them ask where you're from, makes them doubt the story you know to be true. And this can go on for months, years, sometimes forever. There was a woman from the US who had a stroke and woke up speaking with a British-sounding accent. She had never been to the UK. People would challenge her constantly, say she was doing it for attention, ask her to prove she was really American. She started avoiding phone calls, skipping social events, because every single interaction came with questions she never asked for. But this is where it gets deeper. Foreign accent syndrome is not just a speech disorder. It's a glimpse into how fragile the link is between your brain and your identity. You can have perfect memories, the same personality, same beliefs, same goals, but if your voice changes, people treat you differently. And when people treat you differently, you start to change too. The brain is plastic, meaning it adapts constantly. So if the world starts treating you like someone from a different country, even subtly, your brain begins to absorb that social feedback. You start to hesitate when you speak. You become hyper-aware of every word. You overthink sentences you used to say without effort. That self-consciousness begins to shape your entire experience of being you. And here's the real question. If your voice changed tomorrow and never went back, How long would it take before you no longer felt like yourself? What does it take to shake your sense of identity? We think of ourself as something stable, but foreign accent syndrome is proof that even tiny shifts in the machinery of the brain can fracture the illusion of a solid self. It's a consciousness trap in the purest sense, because you are still you. Nothing has changed in your memories, your choices, your soul. But the outside world keeps reflecting back a version of you that doesn't match what you feel inside. And that mismatch becomes exhausting. Some people recover. Their accent slowly shifts back. The brain reroutes and finds a path back to the original voice. But others never do. And they're forced to rebuild a sense of identity around this new vocal reality. It's not just about how they speak. It's about how they're heard. And that changes everything. So if you've ever thought about how fragile the self really is, this is it. Foreign accent syndrome is what happens when the story you tell with your voice suddenly stops matching the story in your head. And you're left trying to bridge that gap, one word at a time. Visual snow. There are people walking around right now who see the world through a layer of noise. Not metaphorical noise. I mean literal static. Imagine looking at your surroundings, your room, the sky, your own hands, and there's this grainy, flickering veil over everything, like the visual snow on an old TV screen, except it's not on a screen, it's on your life, and it never turns off. This condition is called visual snow, and for the people who have it, it's not occasional. It's not like a weird flash or optical illusion. It's constant. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, every single moment, even with your eyes closed, there's this fuzz. This dancing layer of tiny dots or static over everything, like your brain forgot how to fully clean up the signal of sight. And it's not just the snow. For many people, it comes with after images, light trails, hollows, blurred edges, sensitivity to light. Some even see shapes that aren't really there, not because their eyes are broken. In fact, their eyes are often perfectly healthy, but because the way their brain processes vision is misfiring. Now think about that. Think about how much you rely on your vision just to feel grounded, to feel like the world is stable. You open your eyes and you expect to see a clear, reliable picture. But what if that picture was never fully clear? What if it was always buzzing with static? What if every bright light left a trail? What if every movement had a delay? What if closing your eyes didn't bring darkness, just more noise? That's what visual snow is. It's not dangerous. It won't kill you, but it messes with your experience of reality in a way that's almost impossible to describe unless you've lived it. And that makes it incredibly isolating. Because how do you explain to someone that your whole field of vision feels like a broken screen? That your brain won't give you peace, not even in the dark. Some people are born with it, others develop it suddenly, sometimes after a migraine, a concussion, or even just randomly. One day everything looks normal. The next, it's like reality has been overlaid with a translucent storm of static, and you can't shake it. You go to the eye doctor. They run all the tests. Nothing's wrong. Perfect vision. Healthy retina. So they send you on your way. But the snow never stops. That's what makes it a consciousness trap. Not because you're losing your mind, but because no one can see what you're going through. No one can feel it but you. And that makes you question yourself. You start to wonder, is this just how reality is now? Am I imagining it? Is this forever? The science is still catching up. We don't know exactly what causes it, but researchers believe it's a problem with visual processing in the brain, specifically in the visual cortex and surrounding areas. These are the systems responsible for filtering and cleaning up visual data. And in people with visual snow, that filter seems to be wide open, meaning they're picking up more background noise in the visual signal than most people ever notice. Think of your brain like a camera with correct features. Most of the time, it smooths things out, removes glare, sharpens edges. But in visual snow, the camera doesn't do that. It shows you everything, including the noise. You get the raw feed, flaws and all. And even though we call it a visual condition, the effects go far beyond just seeing. It changes how people feel. It causes fatigue, anxiety, sensory overload. Because if your brain is constantly bombarded by noise, it's constantly working to make sense of it. That drains your focus, your energy, your peace. Some people can tune it out. They learn to live with it. Like background music you eventually stop noticing. But for others, it becomes the centerpiece of their experience. Every time they try to relax, it's there. Every time they try to sleep, it's dancing behind their eyelids. Every time they look at the world, it's distorted by something they can't escape. And the worst part is, most people have never even heard of it. So if you bring it up, they assume you're talking about floaters, or light sensitivity, or just say you need glasses. But this isn't about vision correction. This is a neurological glitch, a wiring issue, a breakdown in the harmony between perception and clarity. It makes you wonder, how much of what we see is constructed? How much is filtered? Because if something like visual snow can sneak in and disrupt the entire visual field without touching the eyes, that tells us that what we call sight is mostly brain. And if the brain glitches, reality glitches with it. It's the kind of condition that forces you to slow down and reevaluate what you take for granted. A blue sky, a white wall, a still moment in the dark. All of it becomes strange. All of it becomes noisy. And the scariest thing is not knowing if it will ever stop. So the next time you open your eyes and everything looks smooth, clean, silent, no flickering, no grain, no static, remember that for some people, clarity is a luxury. A clear view of the world is not a given. It's a gift. And once it slips, you realize just how fragile your version of reality really is. Anosognosia. There's something deeply unsettling about watching someone deny a truth that's painfully obvious to everyone else. Not because they're in denial, not because they're lying, but because their brain literally cannot register that anything is wrong. That's what anosognosia is. It's when a person has a serious neurological condition, but they have no idea, no awareness, no recognition that something's off, even when the signs are right there in front of them. It's not stubbornness. It's not pride. It's a neurological blind spot. A glitch in self-awareness itself. Picture this. Someone has a stroke and loses the ability to move the left side of their body. Completely paralyzed. No sensation. No control. But when you ask them if they can move their arm, they say yeah, of course. Even as that arm lies limp beside them, unmoving, they'll insist it's fine. You could lift it and let it drop, and they'll laugh it off. Or make up reasons. Say they just don't feel like moving it right now. Or that it's asleep. Anything but the truth. And not because they're faking, but because their brain refuses to update the map of their own body. That's what makes anosognosia so strange. It's not just a lack of knowledge. It's a lack of knowing that you don't know. A gap in consciousness that's invisible from the inside. The person genuinely believes they're fine. They're not pretending. They're not avoiding. Their reality is just different. Now imagine trying to treat that. You're a doctor or a therapist trying to help someone rehabilitate from a stroke or brain injury, but they don't think there's anything to recover from. How do you help someone heal when they don't even think they're sick? This isn't rare either. Anosognosia shows up in all kinds of conditions: stroke, traumatic brain injury, schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, even dementia. In each case, the brain loses its ability to see itself clearly, like a mirror that only shows part of your reflection. And you don't know what's missing, because from your perspective, nothing is. In mental health, it's especially brutal. A person with schizophrenia might insist they're not experiencing hallucinations, that the voices are real, that the paranoia is justified, and you can't reason them out of it, because the part of the brain that handles insight is damaged. It's like arguing with a compass that's lost its north. No matter how calm or logical you are, they just can't feel the gap between perception and reality. And that's where it becomes a consciousness trap. Because this isn't just about physical damage, it's about the very nature of self-awareness. Most of us think we know ourselves. We trust that if something went wrong inside us, we'd notice. We'd feel it. We'd sense it. But anosognosia shows us the scary truth. Sometimes the thing that's broken is the sensor itself. And when the sensor is broken, you can be absolutely certain that you're fine and be completely wrong. There's a case that still blows people's minds. A woman who had a massive stroke affecting the right hemisphere of her brain. She was paralyzed on the left side, could not move her arm or leg at all. But when asked, she said she was using them just fine. She even said she was clapping with both hands, while only one hand moved. When the doctors asked her to demonstrate, she brought her right hand over and patted her left arm and said, "See, both are working." In her mind, she had fully integrated the lie as truth. But again, it's not deception. It's not delusion in the classic sense. It's a structural error in how the brain models itself. The damage interrupts the feedback loop, so the brain just fills in the gaps with its best guess. And the best guess is usually everything's fine. Move along. Nothing to see here. And that's terrifying, because it forces us to ask, how much of what I believe about myself is based on actual feedback, and how much is just my brain guessing? You might assume you'd notice if something were deeply wrong inside you. But anosognosia says, maybe not. Maybe you'd be the last to know. Maybe your certainty is exactly what keeps you from seeing it. And this runs deep, because it doesn't just affect medical recovery. It affects relationships, safety, autonomy. People with this condition will sometimes refuse medication, refuse therapy, walk into traffic, not out of rebellion, but because they truly think they're okay. Their loved ones can beg, plead, cry, and it won't register, because the brain is actively filtering out the alarm bells. It's one of the few conditions where the person is not only trapped, but doesn't know they're trapped, and that's the ultimate consciousness prison. You're in the cell. The door is wide open, but you can't see the bars, so you stay inside, thinking you're already free. So what do we take from this? What's the deeper message? It's this: self-awareness is not a given. It's a function, and like any other function, it can fail, which means your confidence in your own experience might not be the truth, just a strong feeling backed by a faulty system. That's not meant to scare you. It's meant to humble you, to remind you that consciousness is layered, fragile, and sometimes deeply misleading, even when it feels completely solid. Hyperphantasia versus aphantasia. You ever close your eyes and try to picture an apple? Just a simple red apple. Some people see it instantly. Vivid, detailed, like it's floating right in front of them. They can turn it around. See the texture. Imagine the shine of the light hitting the skin, almost like a hallucination on command. That's called hyperphantasia. It's like imagination turned up to God mode. But here's the twist. Not everyone can do that. In fact, a surprising number of people close their eyes and see absolutely nothing. Not a blur, not a faint outline. Just black, empty. They understand what an apple looks like. They can describe it. They know the concept. But they cannot actually picture it at all. That's called aphantasia, zero mental imagery. And for a long time, nobody even realized this was a thing. Most people just assume everyone visualizes the same way. But when researchers started actually asking people what they saw in their mind's eye, they discovered a massive range. Some people have hyper, detailed mental movies running nonstop. Others live their whole lives with nothing but internal dialogue and abstract thoughts. And they had no idea there were other ways to think. This difference is not just a fun personality quirk. It's a full-blown consciousness trap. Because how you imagine things changes how you remember, how you plan, how you dream, how you feel emotion. It affects how you experience reality. Two people can go through the same situation and remember it completely differently, just based on how vividly their brain can recreate it. Someone with hyperphantasia can relive memories in full color. They can mentally walk through their childhood bedroom like it's still there. They can visualize people's faces, places they've been, things they want to build or write or create. Their imagination isn't just a tool. It's a second world, a personal universe that feels just as real as the physical one. But someone with aphantasia might remember that same room through facts. It had a blue wall. There was a desk. The window faced the backyard. But there's no mental image, no visual replay, just knowledge. And here's the kicker. Most of them don't even realize they're missing anything until they find out what other people can do. And then it hits like a brick. Wait, you can actually see stuff in your head. Seriously. The first time people learn about this divide, there's usually disbelief. Like, no way, that can't be real. Either you think hyperphantasia sounds like some superpower, or aphantasia sounds like a malfunction. But neither one is broken. They're just different ways the mind processes experience. And that difference leads to totally different inner lives. Take creativity, for example. You'd think aphantasia would be a disadvantage. But actually, some incredibly creative people have it. Writers, scientists, artists. Because their imagination works in concepts and structure, not visuals. They can map out entire worlds in their head without ever needing a picture. It's like building the frame of a house instead of painting the walls. On the flip side, hyperphantasia can be so vivid that it becomes overwhelming. Some people with it report sensory overload just from imagining something intense. They can't stop the images. Memories hit like flashbacks. Emotions attach to those mental pictures with full force. It's powerful, but it can also be hard to control. And here's where it ties back to consciousness. Most people think thoughts are just thoughts, but what we're discovering is that thoughts come in wildly different forms: visual, auditory, conceptual, emotional. Some people think in pure language, others think in shapes and colors. Some think in feelings that don't even have words attached to them. So when you ask, what is consciousness made of? you start to realize it's not one thing. It's a mosaic, a blend of sensory experiences, memory systems, attention loops, internal narratives. And depending on your brain's wiring, your version of consciousness might be radically different from mine. Imagine trying to describe a dream to someone who has never seen a mental image, or asking someone with aphantasia to visualize their future goals. It's like asking someone born without taste to imagine the flavor of chocolate. It's not just hard, it's literally impossible to translate. And yet, we go around assuming we're all playing with the same mental toolbox. That's the trap. That invisible assumption that our internal worlds are basically the same. That when I say imagine a beach, you're seeing what I see, feeling what I feel. But maybe you're not. Maybe you're pulling up colors and sounds and movement, while I'm just listing facts in a quiet, dark room inside my head. And maybe that's why we misunderstand each other so much. Why some people seem deeply emotional and others come off as cold. Why some people connect to art or music or stories in ways that feel almost spiritual, while others are just observing the surface. It could all come down to how vividly they can recreate experience inside their own minds. The more we study this, the more it starts to look like imagination is not just some fun little side feature. It might be one of the core components of consciousness, the ability to simulate, to recreate, to generate internal versions of reality. Some brains do it visually, some don't, but they're all trying to model the world in some way. And the style of that modeling shapes how we feel, who we are, and how we relate to everything around us. So yeah, it might seem like a simple difference. Can you picture an apple or not? But that tiny question opens the door to a much bigger realization that the contents of our consciousness are not universal, they're deeply personal. And most of the time, we have no idea how different someone else's mind might be until they tell us, or until we ask. The rubber hand illusion and extensions. Here's something that will mess with your sense of self in the best way. It's called the rubber hand illusion, and it proves just how easily your brain can be tricked into believing something that isn't true. Not just on a mental level, but on a physical, deeply embodied level. This illusion doesn't just fool your mind, it rewires what your body believes is actually part of you. So here's how it works. You sit down at a table. One of your real hands is hidden out of sight behind a screen. In front of you, there's a realistic rubber hand placed where your real hand would normally be. Then a researcher takes two small brushes and starts stroking both the rubber hand and your hidden real hand at the same time, in perfect sync. At first, it feels kind of pointless. You know the rubber hand isn't yours. You're not stupid, but something weird starts to happen. After about a minute or two of that synchronized brushing, your brain starts to blur the line between what it sees and what it feels. And suddenly, the rubber hand starts to feel like your own. Not just conceptually, but physically. Like if someone smacks the rubber hand, you flinch. You feel a kind of ghost pain, like it's happening to your body. And that's the scary part, because your brain, without asking you, just updated its body map. It adopted a fake limb as real based on nothing more than timing and visual feedback. That is how fast and flexible your sense of self is. You can literally absorb plastic if the signals line up right. But it doesn't stop there. Researchers have pushed this illusion even further. They've used it to trick people into feeling ownership over mannequins, avatars in virtual reality, even invisible limbs. That's right. In some experiments, People felt as though they had a third arm that was totally invisible, just because the cues lined up in a convincing way. They could feel touches on thin air, as long as the brain believed there should be something there. There's even a version of this with full body illusions. You wear a VR headset that shows a camera feed of someone standing behind you, and after just a little sensing between what you feel and what you see, you start to feel like you've jumped into that other body. You look down and feel like that body is yours, even if it's a different gender, a different race, a different size. The brain doesn't care. It just wants consistency between inputs. If the senses agree, it updates the model, and you become someone else. Now think about what that means for consciousness. You walk around thinking your body is this fixed, solid thing. Like your brain just knows where your limbs are, what's you and what's not. But the rubber hand illusion shows that your sense of body is just a story. It's a constructed model, and it can be edited with shockingly little effort. The brain doesn't care what's true. It cares what's useful. What helps you survive? What helps you navigate the world? And if a rubber hand gets stroked in sync with your nerves, your brain says, all right, cool, I guess that's mine now. Ownership is not hard-coded. It's fluid, it's negotiable. Now apply that to things like phantom limb syndrome. When someone loses a limb but still feels it, still itches it, still gets cramps in it, it's because the body map in the brain doesn't update right away. That limb is still in the system, even if it's gone physically. And with the right mirror trick or virtual reality setup, you can actually trick the brain again. Show it the missing limb in action. And the pain goes away, not because the body changed, but because the brain finally accepted a new map. This opens up some wild possibilities. If you can trick your brain into owning a rubber hand, what else can you trick it into owning? Can you extend your body into a tool, a machine, a robot? Turns out, yes. There are people training with robotic limbs they control with their thoughts, and after enough time, they don't feel like tools anymore. They feel like part of the body, not an object, but an extension of self. Some neuroscientists even think the brain is already wired for this, that our sense of self naturally extends to anything we control. A car becomes part of our spatial awareness. A phone becomes an extension of memory. A computer becomes part of our thinking loop. We treat these tools not as separate, but as add-ons to the self, like modular consciousness. And that raises a deeper question. Where does the body end? Where does the self end? If you can swap out limbs, extend your body into objects, and feel ownership over things that aren't even alive, then maybe your sense of self is not locked in the skin. Maybe it's a field, a system, a pattern that shifts depending on what you connect to. The rubber hand illusion is a doorway into that realization, that the feeling of being you is not this fixed internal truth. It's a fragile, flexible, constantly updating illusion based on whatever the brain finds believable. You are not just your body. You are whatever your brain agrees to include in the story. And the moment you realize that, it changes everything. Because it means your identity, your awareness, your sense of presence is not nearly as limited as it seems. It can stretch. It can shift. It can merge with other forms. And in the future, with tech evolving the way it is, the lines between body, tool, and mind are only going to get blurrier. What the rubber hand teaches us is simple. You are not a thing. You are a process, and that process can be hacked. Body transfer illusions in VR. This one is wild, like really wild. Not just because the science is cool, but because it completely shatters what we think the self even is. We're talking about body transfer illusions in virtual reality. Basically, how your brain can be tricked into thinking that someone else's body is actually yours, and not just as a thought, as a full-on, felt experience, like your mind literally shifts into a different shell. So here's how it works. You put on a VR headset, and instead of seeing the world from your usual first-person perspective, you're now seeing through someone else's eyes. A different gender, different skin color, different age, different build. And when you move your head, their head moves. When you raise your arm, their arm moves. Everything feels synced. You don't just see them, you become them. After just a couple minutes of this, the switch happens. Your brain starts to accept that body as your own. You look down, and the hands, the legs, the chest in the virtual world, they feel like yours. You flinch if they're touched. You feel phantom sensations. You start to move more like that person. You might even start thinking a little differently. Your sense of self starts to shape itself around this new body. And this isn't just a trick of the eyes. It shows up in physiological data too. Heart rate changes. Skin conductance shifts. Emotional reactions sync up to the new identity. If someone hits that virtual body, your stress levels spike. Your body prepares to defend itself, even though you know it's not real. Even though part of your brain is fully aware it's just a headset and a simulation. Your nervous system says nope. This is me now. Now pause and think about what that means. Your sense of self, the thing you think is so deep and personal and anchored, can be overwritten in less than 10 minutes by sensing up some visuals and movement patterns. You don't have to be hypnotized. You don't have to believe in anything. Your brain just goes, oh, the signals match. I guess this is who we are now. And it doesn't stop there. Researchers have used this to help people experience life from radically different perspectives. White people becoming black, men becoming women, adults becoming children, healthy individuals stepping into disabled bodies. And in many cases, people report genuine changes in empathy, mood, even social attitudes. Not because they were taught something, but because for a moment they were someone else. One experiment had people step into the body of someone facing racism. Afterward, participants showed less unconscious racial bias on psychological tests. Another one had men embody a female body and report more sensitivity to harassment and unwanted attention, not because they were told to feel that way, just because they briefly were that way. This is the real power of VR body transfer. It doesn't just show you someone else's world, it gives you a short-term version of their subjective experience, the way their body moves, the way people respond to them, how it feels to look in a mirror and see something completely different looking back, and have your brain say, yep, that's me. And that cracks open a deep truth about consciousness, that your identity isn't as solid as you think. It's not some fixed soul floating inside a body. It's a constantly updating model, a story your brain tells based on whatever sensory data it's getting at the time. Change the signals, and the story changes with it. Now, this isn't just cool science. It hits at something way deeper. Because if your sense of self can be altered that fast, what does that say about how real it is? Maybe who you are is not this sacred core trapped inside your skin. Maybe it's a feedback loop between brain and body, a loop that can be hijacked, extended, even swapped out. Think about how many things this touches: gender identity, racial experience, body image, disability, trauma. The way we judge others, the way we define ourselves, Most of it rests on the idea that we are our bodies. But VR shows that's not entirely true. You're not the body. You're the experience of owning a body, and that experience is way more flexible than we thought. Even cooler, this has therapeutic potential. People struggling with body dysmorphia, PTSD, chronic pain. There are early studies showing that body transfer illusions can help recalibrate how the brain relates to the body, giving people a new lens, a new narrative, a break in the loop they're stuck in. That's huge. But of course, it also comes with risks. If you can feel like someone else that easily, then who's to say companies or governments won't use that for manipulation? Put someone in the body of a soldier, a prisoner, a product mascot, anything. Train them to think a certain way by literally reshaping how they experience themselves. The ethics here are not hypothetical. They're urgent, because the tech is already here. And the effects are real. What body transfer illusions show is that selfhood is not just an idea. It's a sensation. And that sensation can be hacked. It can be replaced. And once it's replaced, even just for a moment, it leaves a mark. You come back changed. Not dramatically, but something shifts. The edges of who you thought you were get a little blurrier, a little more open. And in that space, there's room for empathy, for transformation, for questioning what it really means to say, I am this. Because maybe the deeper truth is that you are not your body. You are whatever the brain believes is yours, and that belief is a moving target. The out-of-body self-misalignment studies, so this next one pushes even further past the edges of the body. It's not just about tricking your brain into owning a rubber hand or swapping bodies in VR. This one goes deeper, into that strange space where the whole sense of being in a body can start to fall apart. It's called out-of-body self-misalignment. And, yeah, it's exactly what it sounds like. Scientists have found ways to make you feel like you are literally outside yourself, floating, watching your own body from the outside. Not in some mystical, near-death way, but in a lab, with headphones, a camera, and the right timing. Here's how they do it. First, they set you up with a headset and a video feed that shows your own body from behind. So you're seeing yourself from a few feet away, almost like you're watching a third-person video game. Then they start introducing audio cues, tactile sensations, and visual effects, all timed perfectly. You hear something tap the shoulder you're looking at on the screen, and at the same time, you feel the same tap on your real shoulder. And slowly, your brain starts to drift. Your sense of ownership over your actual body starts to fade, and your sense of presence, that deep feeling of I am here, starts to shift into that visual perspective outside of you. You stop feeling like you're in your body, and you start feeling like you're hovering behind it, watching yourself. Now, this might sound like science fiction, but it's been replicated in controlled studies multiple times. People really do report feeling like they've left their body, like they're occupying a space outside their own head, and their physiological responses change to match. For example, if someone threatens the virtual body you're watching, your stress response spikes. Even if your real body is totally safe, that body on the screen becomes the new center of self. And here's the wildest part. You don't need a full VR rig or crazy special effects. The key is timing. When your senses sync up just right, your brain prioritizes the perspective that feels most coherent. It says, okay, all these inputs are lining up from that spot, so I guess that's where we are now. And just like that, you relocate, not physically, but experientially. What that tells us is something huge. The feeling of being inside your body, the thing we take for granted every second of our lives, is not a fixed truth. It's a fragile, constructed experience, a guess your brain is making based on what you see, hear, and feel. And when those inputs get scrambled or shifted just slightly, that sense of self can drift away from the body like smoke. People who go through these experiments describe it as deeply disorienting. Some feel calm and floaty, like a lucid dream. Others feel anxious, like they've lost contact with reality. And it makes sense. The body is home base. When that anchor slips, everything else gets blurry. Who you are, where you are, what's real. But this isn't just a curiosity. This kind of research is helping us understand what's really going on in states like dissociation, derealization, or even some forms of trauma. Because those aren't abstract mental states. They're breakdowns in the brain's ability to keep the self aligned with the body. When something overwhelms the system, the brain can disconnect, not metaphorically, literally. The sense of being here starts to float away. And on the flip side, understanding how to induce this effect deliberately could lead to powerful tools. For therapy, for treating chronic pain, for helping people reconnect to a body they feel alienated from, or even for building experiences where you deliberately step outside yourself. To reflect, to calm down, to reset your nervous system. There's potential here most people haven't even begun to explore. But of course, it also opens a door into something darker. If your brain can be tricked into moving yourself out of your body, what happens when companies start to exploit that? What happens when someone starts designing out-of-body illusions that make you more suggestible, more compliant, more disconnected from physical cues? That's not paranoia. That's where the tech is heading. And we need to be thinking about that now, before it turns into something we can't put back in the box. Still, the real lesson here is this. The self is not where you think it is. It's not locked inside your skull. It's not glued to your bones. It's a point of view your brain is constantly updating based on the best guess it can make. And when that guess shifts, so does your reality. So much of our life is built on this invisible assumption that we are in here, inside this body, controlling it like a driver in a car. But what if that's just a useful illusion? A story your brain tells to keep things feeling stable. And what if that story can be edited, or paused, or replaced? When you experience out-of-body misalignment, you're not just being fooled by technology. You're being shown something true, that the boundary between self and body is not a wall. It's a thread, and it can move. Mirror touch synesthesia. There are people out there who literally feel what other people feel, not in a poetic, emotional way. Not empathy. I'm talking about physical sensation. If they see someone get slapped, they feel a slap on their own face. If someone gets poked in the arm, they flinch and feel a poke on the same spot. This isn't some exaggerated reaction. It's real, and it's called mirror touch synesthesia. Now this is rare. Only about 1 to 2 people out of every 100 have it. But for them, the boundary between self and other is paper thin. When they see someone being touched, their brain lights up as if they're the one being touched. Not metaphorically, neurologically. The same parts of the brain that light up when you feel your own body getting touched light up when they see it happen to someone else. It's like they're mirror neurons. The brain cells that let us simulate what others are experiencing are dialed up to 11. Normally, your brain will echo what it sees. If someone yawns, you might yawn. If someone cringes in pain, you might wince. But for someone with mirror touch synesthesia, those echoes become actual experiences. They don't just imagine it, they feel it, and it's not always fun. Imagine walking down a street and seeing someone bump their head on a sign. You don't just go, "Oof, that looked like it hurt." You feel it. You feel the dull ache in your own forehead. Now imagine watching a movie where someone gets punched or stitched up or crushed by debris. You're not watching it. You're living it. Some people with mirror touch have to avoid violent scenes entirely. Others feel exhausted in crowded places just from all the subtle touches and movements happening around them. Being in public is like getting touched by ghosts all day long. Every person they see is another potential sensation. But here's the twist. This condition reveals something profound about how all of us experience other people. Because mirror touch might just be an extreme version of something the brain already does. See, we all have a mirror system. It's part of how we learn, how we relate, how we feel empathy. If you've ever winced when watching someone stub their toe, that's your mirror neurons doing their job. But in most people, that simulation stays in the background. In mirror touch, it jumps into the spotlight. So what's really happening here? The best guess is that their brains don't properly separate the map of self from the map of others. Usually, your brain knows what's yours and what's not. If you see someone get touched, it mirrors it just enough to understand, but not so much that you mistake it for your own sensation. But in mirror touch synesthesia, that filter breaks down. The simulation crosses the line and gets treated like your own experience. It's like the self boundary. That invisible line that says this is me and that is you gets blurred. And in a way, that's fascinating, because it suggests that those boundaries are not absolute. They're constructed, flexible, maybe even fragile. And once they're weakened, your brain just includes other people's experiences in your own body map. This has ripple effects. Some mirror touch synesthetes also report heightened emotional sensitivity, not just to touch, but to feelings, sadness, fear, anxiety. Being around others is like being plugged into 1,000 wires at once. They don't just notice how someone feels. They absorb it. They carry it. They wear it. Now, on one hand, that sounds like a curse. But it also gives us a glimpse of what human consciousness might be capable of if the boundaries softened just a little. Imagine if everyone could feel a little bit more of what others felt. Not in theory, but in the body. How different would our relationships be? Our politics? Our sense of justice? The people who live with mirror touch aren't superheroes. They struggle. They get overwhelmed. They have to learn how to ground themselves and set boundaries. Because everything around them is amplified, but in a strange way, their experience reveals something true about all of us. That maybe the wall between self and other is not as thick as we like to think. That maybe empathy, at its core, is a physical thing. And this condition raises questions that go even deeper. Where exactly does your experience of being you begin and end? If seeing someone touched can create the same feeling in your own skin, then what defines the self? What makes a sensation yours versus theirs? If the wiring gets crossed, does that mean your body stops being your own? Or does it mean that your body, your awareness, is already more collective than it seems? There's even research exploring whether mirror touch might help us understand disorders of the self, like depersonalization or certain forms of autism, because these are also conditions where the brain struggles to sort out what's self and what's not. The fact that this thin membrane can be breached either accidentally or by nature, shows us just how fluid the experience of identity really is. So no, mirror touch synesthesia isn't just a party trick or a neurological glitch. It's a living example of how fragile and mysterious the self really is. It shows that consciousness isn't just what happens inside your head. It's what happens in the space between you and everything you witness. It's a mirror that sometimes forgets which side it's on, and maybe, just maybe, that's not a malfunction. Maybe it's a reminder of something ancient and real, that deep down, under all the stories and categories, we are wired to feel each other. The Ganzfeld Effect. You don't need drugs to hallucinate. You don't need trauma or mental illness or extreme exhaustion. All you need is boredom. Real, raw, full-spectrum sensory boredom. I'm talking about the Ganzfeld Effect, a weird little mind hack that causes full-on hallucinations using nothing but silence, soft light, and your own brain turning against itself after a few minutes of nothingness. So here's how it works. You take a ping-pong ball, cut it in half, and tape each half over your eyes. Then you shine a soft red light toward your face. You put on headphones playing white noise. That's it. You sit. You wait, and your senses, stripped of anything meaningful to latch onto, start making stuff up. Within about 5 to 10 minutes, things get strange. People start seeing shapes, movement, sometimes full-on scenes, faces, landscapes, flashing lights. Others hear voices, distant music, weird mechanical sounds. And the longer it goes on, the weirder it gets. It's like dreaming while you're awake. But your eyes are open, and you know you're not asleep. The brain just starts filling the void. This isn't a rare side effect. It's built into the machinery of perception. Your brain is designed to constantly interpret signals from the world. But when those signals go flat, no motion, no contrast, no pattern, no change, the system doesn't just shut off. It improvises. It says, hey, something must be happening. Let's create something to process. And that's where the hallucinations come from. Not because the brain is broken, but because it's doing its job too well. It's trying to find meaning where there is none. So it starts pulling from memory, from imagination, from random noise in the system. And then it projects that outward as if it's coming from the world. What you're seeing isn't the external world at all. It's raw signal prediction. It's your brain saying this might be what's out there. So I'm going to show it to you like it's real. And that tells us something huge. That your normal experience of reality is already a hallucination. It's just one that matches what your senses usually bring in. The Ganzfeld Effect strips away the input and leaves you with the scaffolding underneath. It's kind of terrifying, because it means the solid, grounded, visual world you rely on isn't as objective as it feels. You think you're seeing what's there, but really, you're seeing your brain's best guess about what's there. It's accurate most of the time because it's trained to be. But when there's nothing to anchor to, the guesswork doesn't stop. It just gets weirder. Now imagine being locked in a white padded room, or in the middle of a snowstorm with no horizon, or in complete darkness with no sound. You'd start experiencing similar things. The brain goes stir crazy, not emotionally, but perceptually. The Ganzfeld Effect just gives us a safe way to study that process in a controlled way. And it's not just visual. People report emotional shifts, time distortion, feelings of presence, even full-on out-of-body sensations. Some get the feeling that someone else is in the room. Others lose track of where their own body begins and ends. Some even report seeing scenes from childhood, conversations that never happened, faces they can't place. The brain opens the floodgates when it's left alone with itself. That might sound scary, and for some people, it is, especially those not used to sitting with silence. But for others, it becomes a kind of meditation, a way to watch the raw activity of the mind without distraction. Some even use it to tap into creative ideas or emotional insights that usually stay buried under the noise of everyday life. But what the Ganzfeld effect really shows is that perception is not passive. It's not just receiving the world. It's generating a version of the world second by second. And when the usual input is taken away, the generation doesn't stop. It just floats upward from deeper layers. Memory, fear, desire, pattern, seeking, all of it comes out to play when there's nothing else going on. There's something strangely humbling about that, to realize that your mind is constantly constructing reality, even when there's nothing real to go on. It means that the boundary between truth and imagination is thinner than it feels, that even in waking life, we're walking through a simulation that only becomes visible when it glitches. This is why sensory deprivation tanks, meditation retreats, long hikes in silence, they can all trigger something similar, not because they change you, but because they remove the noise, and in the quiet, you hear the machinery behind your thoughts, the endless stream of images, feelings, assumptions, invented meaning. The Ganzfeld effect isn't just a science experiment, it's a mirror, one that shows you what your brain is doing all the time. You just don't notice, because most of the time it aligns with reality. But when the world goes quiet, your brain starts whispering, and what it says is not always rational, or safe, or comforting. But it's honest, it's raw, and in a strange way, it reminds you that your mind is a world of its own, constantly generating, constantly interpreting. Whether it's looking at a red dot on a ping-pong ball or the face of someone you love, whether it's decoding white noise or the sound of your name being called, it's always working, even when nothing is there to see. So next time you stare into a blank wall or drift off in a dark room with no sound and start to see something moving that isn't really there, don't freak out. That's not a glitch. That's your brain doing what it's always done, making meaning out of the void. Microdreams. You ever have one of those moments where you just closed your eyes for what felt like 2 seconds, and suddenly you're snapping back like you were halfway through a dream, like you just slipped into another world and got yanked back before you even knew you were gone? That's not your imagination. That's something called a microdream. These things are real, and they happen way faster than most people realize. You can literally start dreaming within seconds of closing your eyes. Not minutes. Not once you hit deep sleep. Just a few seconds of quiet, and boom, your brain starts building a whole alternate reality out of thin air. And the crazy part is, you've probably experienced hundreds, maybe thousands of microdreams in your life, and you just never noticed. They come and go so fast, your conscious mind barely registers them. But they're there. Little flashes, fragments, sensations, images that feel like they came from nowhere. You close your eyes for what you think is just a blink, and suddenly you're walking through a hallway that doesn't exist. You're hearing someone whisper your name in a voice that's not yours. You're seeing lights, colors, people you haven't thought about in years. It lasts maybe 2 seconds, and then it's gone, like a dream evaporating before you can even touch it. Now here's where it gets weird. Microdreams happen during what's called the hypnagogic state, that in between space right as you're falling asleep. Your brain is shifting gears, loosening its grip on logic and waking thought, but you're not totally out yet. It's a gray area, and in that space, strange things start to happen. Your body starts to shut down, but your mind stays a little too awake. That's the perfect recipe for microdreams. And they're not just random noise. Your brain is already dreaming before you fully fall asleep. These moments can feel vivid, intense, emotional. You might feel like you're falling. You might hear a voice call out. You might get hit with a scene so clear, it leaves you wondering if you imagined it or actually lived it. That's the thing with microdreams. They blur the line between imagination and experience. Your brain treats them almost the same. The regions responsible for sensory input, memory, emotion. They light up just like they do in normal dreaming. But it's happening while you're still kind of awake. It's like watching your mind start to paint before the canvas is even ready. And it doesn't just happen at night. You can experience microdreams in the middle of the day. Ever been sitting in class or a meeting or behind the wheel of a car, not even fully asleep, just zoning out, and suddenly you see something in your mind that feels real. A quick image, a scene, a weird little flash that doesn't make sense. That might have been a microdream. The danger is they don't feel like dreams. They feel like reality. That's why people sometimes think they saw something that wasn't there. Or they swear they heard a sound that didn't happen. And they're left confused, trying to explain a glitch in their own experience. But the truth is, your brain doesn't wait for full sleep to start slipping into that dream mode. It gets bored, it gets tired, and it starts simulating, running stories, testing memories, playing with emotions. And because it happens so fast, you don't even get the chance to question it. Now here's the trap most people fall into. We think dreaming is this thing that happens far away, deep in sleep, once we've shut everything else out. But microdreams show that dreaming is always close. Right under the surface. Your brain is always ready to start generating experiences, even when you're barely drifting. You don't need hours of sleep. Sometimes all it takes is a pause, a blink, a breath, and the implications of that are huge. It means that consciousness, the experience of being here, is constantly switching modes. You're never fully awake or fully asleep. You're always dancing somewhere in between. Even in the middle of the day, your mind might slip into dream logic for a second and come right back without you noticing. So what does that say about reality? If your brain can create full, blown experiences in under 5 seconds without your permission, what does that say about the stability of the world you're walking through? How do you know what's real? What parts of your day are microdreams you just didn't catch? And it gets deeper. Because some researchers believe microdreams might actually be connected to creativity, to insight. You ever had a problem you couldn't solve, and then out of nowhere, a random image or idea pops into your head, and it just makes sense? That might have been your brain slipping into microdream mode and pulling something from the dream world into waking thought. Some of the greatest minds in history, artists, inventors, musicians, have talked about ideas that came to them in those weird twilight moments. The split second before sleep, the edge of awareness. That's microdream territory. That's where the subconscious throws things at you without warning. No logic, no filter, just raw material. And maybe that's not something we should ignore. Maybe microdreams are a sign that your mind is always more alive than you think, that even in silence, it's trying to speak. That consciousness isn't just something you switch on or off. It's more like a wave, shifting constantly, showing you flashes of other worlds when you least expect it. So the next time you close your eyes and see something strange, something vivid, something that vanishes before you can grab it, don't brush it off. That might have been a dream. A real one, just faster than you were ready for. Hypnagogia and Hypnopompia. There's a doorway your mind walks through every night, and most people have no idea it even exists. It's not sleep. It's not wakefulness. It's that strange, slippery zone right before you fall asleep and right before you fully wake up. 2 moments where your consciousness unravels and reweaves itself. One is called hypnagogia. The other is hypnopompia. And if you've ever felt like you were drifting through something not quite real, but not quite a dream, you've already been there. Let's start with hypnagogia. That's the one that happens as you're falling asleep. You're still aware of the room around you, but it starts to fade. Your thoughts get strange. Your body feels like it's sinking, or floating, or pulsing with a rhythm that doesn't exist. Sometimes you hear sounds that aren't there. Music, voices, footsteps. You might see flashes of color or faces that morph into other faces. Your limbs twitch. The logic of your waking brain starts to glitch, and in that moment, you're not quite sure what's real anymore. And yet, there's something peaceful about it. Hypnagogia can feel like the mind is unspooling itself, like all the layers of thought and stress and control are being peeled back, and what's underneath is pure chaos, but somehow it makes sense. This is also the state where people report some of the strangest experiences of their lives. Not dreams, not hallucinations, something in between. There's even a phenomenon called the exploding head syndrome. And no, your head doesn't actually explode. But as you're falling asleep, you might suddenly hear a loud bang, like a gunshot or a crash, and jolt awake thinking something happened. But nothing did. That's your brain misfiring during the shift. The boundary between external sound and internal simulation just broke down for a second. Now, on the other end of sleep, there's hypnopompia. That's the state right as you're waking up. And it's just as strange. You start becoming aware again, but your dream world hasn't let go yet. Your eyes might open, but your body's still paralyzed. You might see something standing in the corner of your room. You might hear whispering or footsteps. You might feel like someone is sitting on your chest, watching you. That's sleep paralysis. It's terrifying if you don't know what it is. But it's actually a natural part of the hypnopompic state. Your brain paralyzes your body during REM sleep so you don't act out your dreams. But sometimes you wake up before that switch flips back on. And during those few seconds, your mind is awake but still dreaming. That's why everything feels so real. Because it's being projected into your waking perception. Some people interpret those moments as supernatural. They see shadows, beings, presences. And to be fair, it does feel like something otherworldly is happening. But it's not. It's just your brain caught between two states. Still dreaming while waking up. Still processing reality through the lens of a dream. And honestly, it's kind of amazing that our minds can even do that. These aren't glitches. They're features, built in parts of consciousness that most people never talk about. But if you pay attention to them, they show you something profound, that the boundary between waking and dreaming isn't as solid as we like to think. It's porous, fluid, sometimes even unreliable. What's wild is that some people can learn to stay inside these states on purpose. Artists, lucid dreamers, psychonauts, they learn to linger in that hypnagogic space and pull ideas from it. That's where surreal art comes from. That's where strange music and symbols and concepts emerge. Because in that in-between space, the logical mind shuts off just enough for the subconscious to start speaking. There's even science behind it. Thomas Edison used to hold a steel ball in his hand while he drifted off in a chair. As soon as he started slipping into hypnagogia, his hand would relax, drop the ball, and the sound would wake him up. But in that tiny moment, just before waking, he'd catch flashes of insight, ideas that seemed to come from nowhere. And many of his inventions came out of that exact process. Artists like Salvador Dali did the same thing. He called it slipping into the slumber with a key, holding on to just enough awareness to walk along the edge of sleep and fishing for images no waking mind could invent. And when you think about it, that's what hypnagogia and hypnopompia really are. Edges, thresholds, bridges between the real and the unreal, between control and surrender, between logic and something older, deeper, maybe even more true. We tend to think of sleep as this off switch, but these transitional states reveal the truth. Your consciousness is not binary. It doesn't just shut off and turn back on. It melts, shifts, reconfigures itself, and in those short windows, sometimes only a few seconds long, you get to glimpse what your mind is like without rules. And maybe that's why they matter. Because in that space, you're not trying to be anything. You're not performing. You're not problem solving. You're just experiencing. Pure awareness without the filter. And yeah, sometimes it's beautiful. Sometimes it's terrifying. But it's always real. So the next time you're falling asleep and you hear a voice that isn't there or see a shape that makes no sense or feel like you're drifting out of your body, don't panic. Don't push it away. That's not a malfunction. That's your consciousness showing you what it's capable of. And maybe, just maybe, those between states are not transitions at all. Maybe they're the places where something bigger peeks through. Not fully dream. Not fully awake. Just you. In raw, unfiltered form. The false awakening loop. There's this thing that happens to some people during dreams. It's rare, but when it hits, it feels like a glitch in reality. You wake up in your bed. Everything looks normal. Everything feels real. You stand up, brush your teeth, maybe check your phone. And then suddenly, something feels off. You blink and wake up again. Same bed, same morning. But now you realize the first one was a dream. So you shake it off, go about your routine again, until it happens a third time. You wake up, again, and again, and again. That's called a false awakening loop. It's when your brain keeps tricking you into thinking you've woken up, but you're still dreaming. And each time, it feels totally real. The textures, the lighting, the logic of your apartment, everything is convincing enough to pass for real life, until it falls apart. Most people have never experienced this, but if you have, you know how disturbing it is. Because after 2 or 3 loops, you start questioning everything. You lose your grip on what waking up even means, and the longer it lasts, the more fragile your sense of reality becomes. You begin asking questions like, what if I never actually wake up? What if this is just another layer? What if I'm stuck? But here's the part that really gets under your skin. What if waking life is just another false awakening? What if what we call real life is just the most stable dream we've had so far? It has rules, it has consistency, but we've never stepped outside it to compare. We just assume we're awake because it feels familiar. But that's exactly what happens in the dream. The brain is insanely good at constructing reality. When you dream, it creates entire worlds on the fly. People, cities, memories, even emotions that make no sense but feel completely true while you're in it. You don't question it because there's nothing else to compare it to in that moment. You just go along with it, and that's the scary part, because that's exactly how most of us go through our daily lives. On autopilot, in a loop, just assuming we're awake because we're doing the things we always do. This trap goes deeper than sleep. False awakening loops are a metaphor for how most people live without realizing it. Think about your morning. You wake up, you check your phone, you drink the same coffee, you scroll through the same apps, you go to the same job, talk to the same people. It feels like real life. But is it? Or is it just another layer of the loop, another level where you've forgotten to question where you actually are? Some people go their entire lives like this. They never stop to ask, is this it? Is this real awareness? Or am I just simulating life based on what I've always done? When people talk about waking up in a spiritual sense, this is what they're pointing to. Not some mystical experience. Just breaking the loop. Just realizing you've been in one. And here's something strange. People who've had false awakening loops often say that the thing that finally broke the cycle wasn't logic. It wasn't proof. It was a feeling. Something in them knew. Not in the mind, in the gut. A kind of deep, primal awareness that this isn't it. That something is off. That instinct is what snapped them out, which makes you wonder, how much of what we call being awake is just habit? Just repetition, just playing out mental scripts we never questioned. And how often do we get that same gut feeling? Something's off, and just ignore it because the world around us looks convincing enough. The false awakening loop is a perfect trap because it uses your own belief in waking life against you. The more convinced you are that you're awake, the more power the dream has to hold you. That's exactly what keeps people asleep in real life too. Not because they're lazy or unaware, but because everything around them agrees with the illusion. Their job, their relationships, their routines, it all plays along. The scariest thing is that sometimes, even when people know they're dreaming, they still can't wake up. Lucid dreamers have reported trying everything. Screaming, jumping, dying inside the dream, and still they loop. That's when it stops feeling like sleep and starts feeling like a prison. But what if waking life is its own version of that? A system that resists disruption, that punishes people for questioning it. A mental loop that resets every time you try to break free. It sounds bleak, but there's something powerful hidden in it. The moment you start to question the loop, not just in dreams, but in everyday life, you create a crack, a tiny opening where awareness can come through. That's the real escape, not flying away or teleporting to another realm. Just becoming so present that the loop can't sustain itself anymore. The false awakening loop teaches you one brutal truth. Your mind can create reality so convincing you forget to doubt it, which means awareness is never guaranteed. You don't get it just because your eyes are open. You have to wake up into it, over and over, not just once. So the real question isn't whether you've been in a dream. It's whether you're in one right now. Sleep cognition during anesthesia. Most people think anesthesia is lights out. You get the mask, count back from 10, and just like that, you're gone. No pain, no time, no memory. You wake up later, groggy, confused, but safe. That's the promise. But for a small group of people, it doesn't go that way. They go under, but they don't actually leave. The body is frozen. The brain is paralyzed, but somewhere inside, a sliver of awareness stays awake. And they remember. It's called anesthesia awareness. And even though it's rare, it's one of the most terrifying consciousness traps a person can experience. Imagine lying on the operating table, unable to move, unable to scream, and feeling every cut, every tug, every sound. But no one knows you're awake. The surgeons think you're under. But your mind is trapped, screaming in silence. Some people only remember vague things. A feeling of pressure. The sound of voices, a sense of dread with no context. Others remember the entire procedure in horrifying detail. And the scariest part is that this happens in a space where we assume we are completely unconscious. A place where we're not supposed to feel or know anything at all. But the mind doesn't always follow the rules. Here's where it gets strange. Not all anesthesia awareness is traumatic. Some people report floating sensations, a feeling of detachment. Some describe a state of pure observation, like being aware of sounds and movement, but without pain or panic, almost like a lucid dream without visuals. The brain is technically offline, but some corner of the mind is still on, still taking notes. Now this shouldn't even be possible. Anesthesia is supposed to shut down consciousness completely. That's the whole point. But it turns out that consciousness isn't a simple on or off switch. It's more like a dimmer, or maybe even a spectrum. And in that spectrum, weird things can happen. Studies using EEGs and brain scans have shown that during surgery, even when people appear unconscious, their brains still respond to words, especially emotional ones. If a surgeon says something disturbing while someone's under, the brain reacts. You won't remember it later, at least not consciously, but it might show up in your stress levels, in your dreams, in your body's reactions. That means even when you're supposed to be totally unconscious, something in you is still listening, and that opens a whole new door. Because if the brain can still hear, still react, still hold on to language and meaning, what else is it holding on to? What's happening during those lost hours? What kind of experiences are taking place that never make it back into memory? This is where the line between sleep, dreams, and anesthesia starts to blur. Sleep cognition is already a weird phenomenon. You can be asleep and still have thoughts. You can reason. You can solve problems. You can even make decisions inside a dream. Now layer anesthesia on top of that, a chemically induced blackout that's supposed to erase all awareness. But somehow, not all of it gets erased. There are stories from people who've gone under and come back with fragments, not memories exactly, more like impressions. A voice they recognize, a smell, a moment of panic with no clear cause. Some people even describe having thoughts while under. Not full conversations, not coherent language, but thoughts, sensations, inner reactions to something they weren't supposed to be awake for. And here's where it really messes with you. If we can think while unconscious, what else can we do? What else is happening beneath the surface in those hidden layers of the mind that never fully shut off? Consciousness might not be as fragile as we think. It might be more like a persistent hum in the background. Even when the lights go out, something keeps buzzing. What if you're never fully gone? What if some version of you is always there, always aware on some level? But most of the time, you just don't remember. Not because it didn't happen, but because the remembering part never got the message. The input was there, but the recording failed. This also raises ethical questions most people never think about. What are we saying around people under anesthesia? What kind of energy are we creating in the room? If their brain is still listening, still reacting, even slightly, then that matters. That's not just dead space. That's a conscious environment with invisible effects. And it's not just in surgery. Think about people in comas, people in deep sleep, people in near-death states. If parts of the brain can stay aware even when everything else is offline, then maybe we need to rethink what unconscious really means. Maybe it's not absence. Maybe it's just silence. Maybe the mind is still there, just watching from behind a locked door. So the trap here is the assumption, the belief that unconscious means unaware, that silence means emptiness. But the reports say otherwise. The studies say otherwise. There's something alive in that darkness. Something listening. Something that doesn't need memory to exist. And that brings us back to the scariest part. If consciousness can survive anesthesia, even in fragments, then where else is it hiding? Where else are we awake without knowing? And how much of our experience is being filtered out before we even get a chance to notice it? Maybe we're only aware of the tip of the iceberg. Maybe most of the mind stays submerged, silent, watching, waiting for us to realize it was never truly asleep. Locked in syndrome awareness traps. There's a nightmare that doesn't get talked about enough. And it's not some metaphor or abstract idea. It's real. It happens. And when it does, it breaks every assumption we have about what it means to be alive. It's called locked-in syndrome. And if you don't know what that is, consider yourself lucky. Imagine this. You wake up, your eyes are open, you're fully conscious. Your thoughts are clear, your memories are intact. You hear everything around you. You understand what people are saying. But you can't move. Not your arms, not your legs, not your face. You can't talk. You can't scream. You can't even blink in some cases. You are trapped inside your own body, completely aware, completely silent. This is not a coma. This is not unconsciousness. This is not dreaming. This is raw, full awareness inside a body that won't respond. And the horror is not just the paralysis. The horror is that no one knows you're in there. To the outside world, you look gone. You look empty. People talk about you like you're not there. They talk over you, around you, as if you're not listening. But you are. You hear every word. You feel every second stretch into forever. Now imagine that going on for days, weeks, months, in some cases years. You're in a hospital bed. Your body might as well be a statue, but inside there's a mind watching it all unfold. You're alive, but not in any way people can see. And at first, no one believes it, because how would they? You can't tell them. You can't prove it. You are conscious in a system that has no way of signaling that consciousness. And that's the trap. Locked-in syndrome is rare, but it's real. And when it hits, it's usually caused by a stroke or brainstem injury. The brain's still functioning, the mind is still there, but the pathways that control movement and speech are severed. It's like cutting the wires to a fully working computer screen. The processor is on, the data is running, but nothing is being displayed. Now, here's where it gets really twisted. Some people with locked-in syndrome have reported being misdiagnosed as vegetative. Imagine that. You're in full awareness, but doctors believe you have no consciousness at all. They may run tests, see no motor response, and conclude that you're gone. And unless someone takes the time to try different forms of communication, maybe tracking eye movements or detecting brain signals, You're completely alone. You can scream in your head all day, and no one will hear it. That's the deepest kind of isolation a human being can experience. It's not just physical. It's existential. Because you're not just trapped in a room. You're trapped in a reality where no one believes you exist. And the irony is, this kind of awareness is more pure than most people ever experience. No distractions, no movement, no conversations, just you, your thoughts, your memories, your fears. That's all there is, and somehow some people survive it. Some even come out of it. And when they do, they describe a world that most of us couldn't handle for a single day. They talk about screaming in silence. They talk about losing track of time. They talk about begging for someone to notice the tiniest eye flicker, because that might be the only signal they can send. One flick, one blink, and it might take weeks for someone to realize that's intentional, that someone is still in there. There's one famous case, Jan Dominique Bauby, who had a stroke and ended up fully locked in. He wrote an entire book using only his left eyelid. He dictated it letter by letter as someone pointed to the alphabet. One blink for each letter. That's how he wrote his story. One word at a time, one blink at a time. And the book wasn't just about suffering. It was about imagination, about memory, about what it means to be alive even when you can't move a single muscle. And that's what makes Locked in Syndrome one of the deepest consciousness traps ever, because it shows you just how fragile our sense of reality is. Most of us think we are our actions, our voice, our face, the way we move through the world. But when all of that is stripped away, when nothing is left but thought, what are you then? You're not dead, but you're not quite alive in the way people recognize. You're a ghost in your own body, and no one believes in ghosts until they see a sign. But what if the sign never comes? This kind of trap isn't just about medical conditions. It's a metaphor for how we ignore consciousness when we can't see it. How easy it is to dismiss someone's inner life just because they're not expressing it the way we expect. And it should force us to question something deeper. How many people in this world are locked in, not just physically, but emotionally, mentally? How many people are fully aware, but totally unseen? The lesson here is brutal, but it's important. Just because someone can't speak doesn't mean they have nothing to say. Just because someone can't move doesn't mean they're not fighting every second to be noticed. And just because someone looks gone doesn't mean they're not still here. Locked in Syndrome is the kind of trap that reminds us how precious awareness really is, and how fragile our connection to the world can become. But it also shows how strong the mind is, that it can survive even that it can hold on, even in the darkest silence, even when no one's listening. Your consciousness is always 0.5 seconds late. You think you're experiencing the world in real time, right now, as it happens. You feel like the moment you hear a sound or see something move or make a decision, that it's happening right then and there, immediate, direct, reality as it is. But here's the trap. You're always half a second behind. Your consciousness is late. Every single moment you're living is already edited, processed, delayed, and packaged before you're even aware of it. The brain does this without asking. It collects everything: sights, sounds, sensations, puts it together into a smooth narrative, and then feeds it to your conscious mind as if it's happening live. But it's not. What you're experiencing right now actually happened about half a second ago. Your awareness is watching a replay. That half-second delay doesn't sound like much, but it changes everything, because it means you're never in the present. Not really. Your brain is giving you the illusion of now, while it quietly edits out the mess, the lag, the raw, chaotic input of the real world. It filters it, smooths it, fixes it, and then presents a finished version like a movie with perfect cuts. The scary part is you never notice, because you never see the version before the edit. There's a famous experiment that revealed this. Neuroscientist Benjamin Libet found that the brain starts preparing for movement before we're consciously aware we made a decision. That means your body is already in motion before your mind thinks it chose to act. The decision shows up in the brain before it shows up in your awareness. You don't act and then become conscious of the decision. You become conscious of the decision after the brain already made it. That one idea, that we're not in control of our choices in the moment we think we are, flipped neuroscience on its head. Because it means free will, at least the way we usually imagine it, might be an illusion created after the fact. You're not the driver. You're the narrator. You're not choosing the path. You're commenting on it as it unfolds, believing the whole time that you're the one in control. Your consciousness is not the operator. It's the voiceover. But your brain doesn't stop there. It also edits your perception of time. It warps your sense of now to keep the illusion of reality feeling seamless. If lightning strikes far away, and the thunder takes a second to reach your ears, your brain cheats. It syncs the flash and the boom so you perceive them as happening at the same moment. It alters time so the world feels solid. And if your brain can rewrite time, what else is it rewriting? This isn't just theory. We've seen it in action. Athletes who say time slows down during a game. People in car accidents who swear they saw everything in slow motion. That's not reality changing. That's perception warping to keep up with extreme events. Your brain is bending time to fit the story. Even your sense of continuity. The feeling that your life is one smooth, flowing timeline is an illusion built moment by moment. Every time you blink, every time your eyes move, your visual field goes blank for a split second. But you don't notice. Your brain fills in the gaps. It guesses what's supposed to be there. You are literally hallucinating stability. So if consciousness is always behind, and time is being bent, and decisions are happening before you're aware of them, what does that make your experience of reality? How much of what you think is the present is just post-production? It's like watching a live stream with a slight delay. Except you never know there's a delay, because the editor is just that good. And once you realize that, something weird starts to happen. You start to question every gut feeling, every instinct, every thought that says, I just made that choice. Did you really? Or did your brain make it first, and now your consciousness is catching up, pretending to own it? And here's where the trap gets personal. If you are always half a second behind, then who exactly is living your life? Because the conscious you, the one that thinks it's in charge, is just seeing the highlight reel. So who's doing the real work? Who's making the calls in real time? There is no inner operator. There is no little self inside your head pulling levers. There's just this constant stream of predictions, corrections, and reconstructions being served to you as reality. But by the time you see it, it's already past. You are a commentator on a game that's already been played. And yet it feels so real, so immediate, so alive. That's the genius of it. Your brain lies to you so well, with such precision, that you never know it's happening. It keeps you sane. It keeps you functioning. but it also means you're living inside a curated version of the world, not the world itself. You're not seeing reality. You're seeing what your brain thinks you need to see when it decides you're ready to see it. So, what does that mean for you right now? It means this moment, the one you think is happening, already happened, and your brain is just now letting you in on it. Everything you feel right now is old news, and everything you think you're deciding is already in motion. You are always half a second late to your own life. And the weirdest part, you never noticed. The illusion of the continuous self. Most people walk around with this quiet assumption that they're one solid person. Like you're a single character, living a life with a clear beginning, middle, and end. The same you who was 5 years old is the same you right now, and the same you in 10 years. One continuous self, just aging over time. But if you actually start paying attention, and I mean really paying attention, that idea falls apart fast. Think about it. The way you thought at 8 years old. What you cared about. What scared you. What made you laugh. That version of you would probably barely understand who you are now. Your beliefs, your habits, even your taste in food has changed. But you don't feel like you became someone else. It feels like you just grew. Like it's all one thread. But what if that's just a story your brain is stitching together after the fact? There's a reason this feels so real. The brain is a master storyteller. It hates gaps. It wants to create order, even when there is none. So it takes all your scattered memories, emotions, roles you've played, and it weaves them into this nice, neat character arc. It's comforting. It gives you identity. It makes life feel like it has structure. But it's not the truth. Psychologists have studied this for years. There's actually a term for it. It's called narrative identity, the idea that what we think of as ourself is really just a running story we keep updating. Every time something happens, you don't just remember the event, you reinterpret it in a way that fits your current identity. It's like editing the past with the software of the present. But here's the catch. Your sense of self depends on memory, and memory is wildly unreliable. It's not a perfect recording. It's more like a reconstruction. Every time you recall something, you're not pulling up the original file. You're recreating it. And each time, it gets a little fuzzier, a little more warped. So even the parts of yourself you think are solid are shifting beneath your feet. Now here's where it gets wild. There have been people who suffered full memory loss. Retrograde amnesia. They forget their life, their relationships, even their name. But when they start recovering, they don't regain their old self. They build a new one. New opinions, new personality traits, sometimes even new likes and dislikes. They become a different person, and they don't even realize it. So if memory can be erased and identity replaced, then who exactly are you? And here's something we've all felt, but don't talk about much. Those moments where you look back at something you did 5 years ago, or even 6 months ago, and you cringe. You feel like that version of you was someone else. Not just less mature, but actually foreign. Like you're watching a stranger with your face. And it makes sense, because in a very real way, you were someone else. The mind is constantly rebuilding itself. New thoughts, new emotions, new inputs. Your cells are dying and being replaced. Your habits evolve. And yet we cling to this idea of being one thing across time. But if every part of you can change, then what is actually staying the same? There's a reason ancient philosophers and modern neuroscientists both struggle to find the core self. Because the more you look for it, the less it shows up. There's no fixed center, no solid ground, just this ongoing swirl of perceptions, memories, moods, desires, shifting moment by moment. And yet the illusion of continuity is so strong. You wake up every morning with the assumption that you're picking up the same life you left off with the night before, that you are the same person who went to bed. But if you really examine it, that feeling comes from familiarity. Your environment, your routines, your name, they all reinforce the sense of sameness. It's not that you're actually the same, it's that the world around you mirrors the story you believe about yourself. But every now and then, that illusion breaks. You move to a new place. You lose someone close. You go through a breakup or a career shift or a mental health spiral. And suddenly, the old version of you doesn't fit anymore. You start to act different, talk different, think different, and it feels like something has ended. Or like you've woken up inside a new body. Those moments are disorienting, but they're also revealing, because they show you that the self is not a stable entity. It's a pattern, a process. It's being rebuilt every second by everything you're exposed to. And maybe that's not something to be afraid of. Maybe it's freedom. Because if there's no fixed you, then you're not locked into anything. You're not your past mistakes. You're not your worst day. You're not the labels other people gave you. All of that can shift. And it does shift, whether you notice or not. You are not the same person you were yesterday. And you won't be the same person tomorrow. And the version of you that's hearing this right now is already fading into memory as a slightly newer version takes its place. So if you've been trying to figure out who you really are, maybe pause that search, because there might not be an answer waiting for you at the end. Just the realization that you are not a fixed point. You are a moving wave, and maybe the point isn't to find yourself. Maybe it's to watch that wave with curiosity instead of control, to let it shift, to let it grow, and to realize that every time it changes, something in you is waking up to the truth, that you were never just one person to begin with. Split brain case studies. There's this set of experiments in neuroscience that almost sounds made up, like something out of a sci-fi novel. A person is sitting calmly in a lab, answering questions, following instructions, totally normal. But then, out of nowhere, their left hand starts acting on its own, unzipping their jacket after they zipped it up, closing a drawer they just opened, even grabbing something out of their right hand like the two sides are arguing. And the wildest part is, they don't even realize it's happening. They think they're in control, but one half of their brain is literally fighting the other half. This is real. These are called split brain patients, and they are living proof that the unified self we all think we have might be one of the biggest illusions of all. So here's what happened. Back in the mid-1900s, doctors were treating people with severe epilepsy. We're talking seizures that were destroying their lives. And as a last resort, surgeons started cutting the corpus callosum, the thick bundle of nerve fibers that connects the left and right hemispheres of the brain. It was a radical move, but in many cases, it actually stopped the seizures. The crazy part is what happened after the surgery. On the surface, these people seemed totally normal. They could walk, talk, think, hold a conversation. But when scientists started running experiments, something strange started showing up. They realized that without the two hemispheres communicating, it was like there were now two separate minds living in one skull. Let me explain how this works. The left side of your brain is mostly responsible for language. It's the part that talks, interprets, explains things. The right side handles more visual and spatial stuff. But here's the catch. Each half of the brain only processes one side of your visual field. The left hemisphere sees the right side of your world. The right hemisphere sees the left. So in these experiments, researchers would flash different images to each side of the brain, like they'd show a picture of a chicken to the right eye, which goes to the left brain, and a picture of snow to the left eye, which goes to the right brain. Then they'd ask the person to point to a related image with each hand. The left hand picked a snow shovel. The right hand picked a chicken. So far, makes sense. Each hand responding to what its hemisphere saw. But then they asked the person to explain why they picked those things. And here's where it gets surreal. Remember, the left brain is the one that talks, but it didn't see the snow. It only saw the chicken. So when the person explained their choice, they said something like, well, the chicken goes with the chicken claw, and the shovel is to clean the chicken coop. That's not just wrong. That's the left brain making up a story to explain the choice of the right brain, which it literally couldn't see. This has a name. It's called confabulation, and it shows something really important. Your brain doesn't just report on reality. It explains it. It interprets. And when it doesn't have the full picture, it just fills in the gaps with whatever makes sense. So now you've got one half of the brain seeing something, reacting to it, making a decision. And the other half, completely unaware of that, confidently inventing a reason for why it happened. And this isn't some rare glitch. It's how the brain normally works. In split-brain patients, the separation is just more visible. But even in people with an intact brain, these inner divisions still exist. We're just not conscious of them. Ever had a moment where you did something without knowing why, and then came up with a reason later? That's your interpreter brain doing its thing, trying to maintain the illusion of a single, consistent self. And it gets even creepier. Some split-brain patients have been known to answer questions with their right hand and contradict them with their left. One side says yes, the other says no. In some cases, the nonverbal right brain would even spell out words by pointing to letters, revealing thoughts the speaking side wasn't aware of. There are stories of left hands slapping away objects the right hand was reaching for. One man's right hand picked out clothes in the morning, and the left hand threw them on the floor. It's like watching two roommates argue over the same body. And if all this is possible, if one body can house two minds, two sets of desires, two conflicting stories, then what does that say about the whole idea of a unified self? We like to think we're one solid person making clear decisions. But under the hood, it's more like a committee. Different parts of the brain are constantly negotiating, disagreeing, working together, and sometimes even working against each other. And your conscious mind is just the spokesperson, the part that takes credit for the decisions it didn't actually make. So what are you really? Are you the voice that explains things, the hand that acts, the thoughts that rise and fade, or are you just the container for all of it, the stage where the performance plays out? Split brain studies pull back the curtain. They show that our sense of self is not a single flame, but a bundle of sparks, flickering in different directions, held together by a story that feels true, but might not be. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You start noticing how often you act on instinct, then rationalize later. how often your thoughts contradict your actions, how parts of you want one thing while other parts want the opposite. The illusion of a continuous, unified self starts to crumble, and in its place, something more honest appears. Not a person with one identity, but a process, a constantly shifting dialogue between parts of the brain that don't always agree, but somehow still manage to keep the show running. And maybe that's the miracle. Not that we are one, but that all these fragments can hold together just long enough to feel like a person. Autonoetic consciousness. You ever be in the middle of doing something totally normal, like brushing your teeth or waiting in line, and then out of nowhere your brain just drops you into a memory so vivid it almost feels real. Not just a picture or a thought, but like you're back there. The air, the smells, the exact emotion you felt at that moment. It doesn't even have to be important. Could be some random childhood morning, sunlight hitting the floor a certain way. But for a second, it's like time folds in on itself and you're fully inside that old version of you. That is autonoetic consciousness. It's this weird, uniquely human thing our minds can do. Mentally time travel. Not just remember facts or events, but to re-experience them. To project ourselves backward and forward through time. Like we have this built-in simulator that can pull up the past or imagine possible futures and let us emotionally live in them. But here's the trap. Just because you can time travel in your mind doesn't mean it's always working in your favor. We tend to assume this ability is a strength. And yeah, it can be. It's how we learn from our mistakes. It's how we imagine what we want, how we plan our lives, how we set goals. You can see yourself in a future apartment or giving a speech or making a decision differently next time. That mental simulation is powerful, but the flip side is it can also be torture. Because once you can re-experience the past, now you can relive every regret, every embarrassing moment, every time you said the wrong thing or didn't speak up. You don't just think about those things, you feel them again. And your body doesn't really know the difference. It reacts like it's happening now. Same heart rate, same anxiety, same shame. Same goes for imagining the future. Your brain starts running worst-case scenarios. What if I fail? What if they leave? What if I embarrass myself? What if I never get there? And now your body is already bracing for something that hasn't even happened. Might never happen, but it feels real. That's the catch. That's the cost of autonoetic consciousness. You're not just living in the present. You're living in a constant loop of replays and previews. And here's where it gets really sneaky. Most of the time, you don't even realize you're doing it. You just feel tense, or sad, or stuck. And you don't connect it back to the fact that you've been running mental simulations all day long. Now think about this. No other species we know of seems to have this kind of time travel. Sure, animals remember things. They form habits. They learn. But they don't appear to have this sense of a continuous self stretched out across time. They don't sit around thinking about what they should have done last Tuesday or worrying about next month's vet appointment. Humans live in narratives. That's what autonoetic consciousness gives us, a sense of being someone who existed yesterday, who exists today, and who will exist tomorrow. That sounds obvious, but it's actually pretty wild. We're not just experiencing life. We're experiencing ourselves experiencing life. And we build entire identities on that. Stories about who we are, where we've been, where we're going. It's like we're living in a movie about ourselves, and we're also the screenwriter, the critic, and the main character. But here's the twist. That story is always being edited. Your memories are not accurate. Your projections into the future are not reliable. And yet, we treat them like truth. We base our mood, our decisions, and our sense of reality on these stories that are full of gaps, guesses, and emotional distortions. And then we wonder why we feel off. Why we feel anxious or disconnected or like we're not fully here. It's because we're barely in the present. We're not in our bodies. We're somewhere else, some other time, mentally running simulations we don't even realize we're inside of. And the scary part is, the more you live in those simulations, the more your brain wires itself to do that by default. The more you rehearse your regrets or stress over the future, the more those neural pathways strengthen. It becomes a loop, a habit. You start reacting to the world not as it is, but as your inner story tells you it is. And you don't even know it's happening, but it's not hopeless. This is where awareness changes everything. When you start noticing that you're mentally time traveling, you create a gap, a moment of space. And in that space, you get to decide, do I need to be in this memory right now? Is this projection helping me? Or am I just making myself suffer because my brain's doing what it's been trained to do? The goal isn't to shut it off. You can't stop your brain from simulating, but you can stop mistaking the simulation for reality. Autonoetic consciousness is one of the most powerful things about being human. But without awareness, it becomes a trap, a constant drift into moments that don't exist anymore or haven't happened yet. And while you're busy living in those shadows, the real moment, the only place anything is actually happening, slips right past you. So the question isn't how to stop mentally time traveling. The question is, can you realize when you're doing it? Can you come back? Can you feel your feet on the ground? Your breath? The room around you? Not because the present is perfect, but because it's the only place anything real ever happens. And maybe when you stop chasing ghosts of the past and fears of the future, you'll remember what it feels like to just be here, to exist, without needing to rewrite the story or jump ahead to the next chapter. Just this moment, just this breath, that's it.